start.
Sure.
Okay. It now being Thursday, December 14th at 5:30, I will go ahead and call to order this regular meeting of the Deschutes County Planning Commission. Our first item is approval of minutes from November 9th. Is there a motion regarding the minutes?
Move to approve.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second.
So it's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes from November 9th, 2023. Do we have any commissioners present on Zoom? One commissioner, okay. Can we see that person? Okay, thank you, thank you. Take your time. And I think we can go ahead and consider our vote here, also a roll call. Commissioner Kelly, how do you vote? Aye. Commissioner Altman,
Aye.
Vice Chair Hopekamp,
Aye.
Commissioner Cyrus,
Aye.
and Commissioner Williams.
Aye.
Thank you. And then I'll go ahead and abstain because unfortunately I was ill and did not attend, although I did listen to the meeting on the video. So the motion passes 5 in favor, 0 opposed with 1 abstaining to approve the minutes from November 9th, 2023. Okay, our next item on the agenda is public comment about items not on the agenda. So we have 2 items on the agenda. Continued hearings for both the Deschutes County 2040 Comprehensive Plan and the RV and rental dwellings. So if you're here to speak about those, you're in the right place. But before we get to that, are there any comments about other issues that anyone would like to bring up or talk about? Yeah, so there are a few members of the public participating on Zoom. And so if you're on Zoom and you have a comment about an item that's not already on the agenda, not the comprehensive plan and not the rental dwellings, please raise your Zoom hand now so we can hear your comment. It looks like we're not seeing any, so we'll move on to our public hearing items. Our first one is a continued public hearing on the Deschutes County 2040 Comprehensive Plan update. So for this item, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Nicole Mardell, Senior Planner.
All right. Good evening, commissioners. I guess our mic on the left-hand side isn't working. So just for the group, if you are coming up to speak, try to use the middle table or the one that I'm at, where the microphones are picking up. I am Nicole Mardell, Senior Long Range Planner for Deschutes County, and this is a continuation of the public hearing from October 26th and also November 9th regarding the county's comprehensive plan update. So I just have a brief PowerPoint to ground us before we begin. So if you're in person today for each hearing, you'll fill out a blue sign-up sheet and submit that to staff so we can provide that to the chair. That will be your notice that you want to provide testimony this evening. Before starting your testimony, please provide your first and last name and your mailing address. And we do have a time limit of 3 minutes per party to ensure an orderly hearing. For our remote participants, if you would like to provide testimony, please attend via Zoom, and you will be notified when it's your opportunity to speak by the chair, and you'll use the raise hand feature to notify the commission that you'd like to testify. So that will be the raise hand button if you're on a computer, or *9 on your keypad if you're dialing in on a phone. For the Deschutes County Comprehensive Plan, all of the record items are on our website, which is deschutes.org/2040. And our comprehensive plan, just for those who may not have attended the other hearings, this is an update to our overall guidance document for land use, growth, and development in the rural county. So this is updated typically every 10 years to reflect new information, best conditions, and the community vision essentially for how the county should grow over the next 20 years. This process has been about a 16-month process. We've gathered quite a bit of community input over that time. And through that, we've developed goals and policies on topics related to housing, natural hazards, economic development, energy, etc. So the role of the plan, it isn't necessarily our zoning code. It's more that overarching guidance and that blueprint for the future in terms of policy for the county moving forward. In the scope of the update, we aren't proposing any changes to designations or zoning of properties. We aren't updating any of our Goal 5 inventories, which pertain to natural resources, so those are remaining the same. And we do have two other separate processes, an update to our transportation system plan and the Tumalo community plan. So those are not a part of this process, they're a separate process. So far to date, we've received oral testimony from 9 individuals or agencies at the previous hearings. We've received over 126 written public comments on a variety of different themes. We'll present all of those 3 themes to you during your deliberations, but they are found on our record page. And we did receive 2 comments from Central Oregon Irrigation District and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Following testimony today, the Planning Commission has a few options to move forward. You can choose to continue the hearing to a date and time certain, close the hearing and leave the written record open to a date and time certain, close the hearing and set a date for deliberations, or close the hearing and commence deliberations. Staff, our recommendation would likely be not to commence deliberations this evening, since typically we want to bring back a matrix to you. But otherwise, you have a few other options there. And with that, I welcome any questions. Thank you.
Are there any questions from the commission to Nicole? Okay, seeing none, we will go ahead and proceed with public testimony about the comprehensive plan update. So if you're here for RV rentals, that's next. We have one blue form so far about this item from Robin Vora. And if other people would like to provide some comment, go ahead and fill out a blue form located over there.
Good evening. I'm Robin Vora. I live here in Bend. I suspect a few people at least have talked about, how the plan might affect their individual properties. And then others have given you broader goals or guidelines, visions they'd like to see for the county. And that's a difficult task you have of trying to balance all that. Overall, I think the plan should emphasize, what is the overall good, greater good of the majority of residents of Deschutes County. And, there's a commission not to, I guess, cave into desires for a growth and individual gain. They may be to the detriment of the majority of the county. I did submit submit an email October 25th, if I recall correctly, with some specifics. I know you were probably looking for, very wording type changes, item 12A, you changed this edit here and there, but that was too much like work. I mean, I'm retired, and hopefully the broader comments that myself and others submitted will be sufficient for you guys to take that. And I don't envy you trying to make all those wording changes. So I wanted to just summarize some of the key points I made in that. I'm not going to try and repeat that email that's on file there. I think we need to minimize wildlife habitat fragmentation, continued encroachment of important habitat, and direct mortality of animals, especially, deer kill on highways. Farm and forest land should be protected. There shouldn't be new subdivisions or urban growth boundary expansions in high wildlife risk areas. Or I could add to that deer, winter habitat, or key deer winter habitat. The transportation plan, I guess you got to look at it separately, but it needs to look for ways to reduce traffic congestion and greenhouse gas emissions. It needs to be more safe biking and walking, and even looking at things maybe a little far-fetched, a commuter train from Madras to La Pine, or even to Amtrak and Chemult someday. We need to emphasize further conservation of water, especially with on-farm irrigation. I think new development shouldn't be permitted without a guarantee of water. Almost all new housing should be in cities. I know, except maybe the ADUs the county commissioners recently, I think, approved. We should terminate short-term vacation rentals less than 30 days. That takes away from the housing supply. And except maybe in destination resorts. that's designed for that. And I think there should be no new destination resorts or major expansions of existing ones. I think that's the summary of what I sent, and I sent more detail on the 25th. And I appreciate your consideration.
Thanks very much. See, we got some new blue forms, so let me just go through and see. It looks like the other blue forms I have are all for RV rentals, which is coming right up. Is anyone else here to speak about the comprehensive plan? And what about on Zoom? Are there Zoom participants? We have a couple Zoom hands raised, so maybe you could go ahead and elevate the first person. Take just a second. What was that, Nicole? Oh, okay. Hello, Doreen. We can't see you on the screen just yet, but we
Hi.
will have you on the screen soon.
Hi, can I leave my camera off for tonight?
Sure, of course. Yeah,
Thank
absolutely.
you.
No problem at all. Yeah.
All right. Thank you guys for giving us another chance to bring other stuff to the table. I wanted to talk a little bit about transportation noise and pollution and within the plan. And, you know, historically, government's targeted impacts onto those who do not have access or cannot afford to go against industry with adequate representation. It should be a top priority for Deschutes County to remember environmental injustice increases the number of those who are disenfranchised, and it drains school resources, mental and medical health resources, legal resources, IQ, and resilience. I've not been hearing human protections and equitable solutions addressed in 2040 planning regarding devastating health exposures to those suffering as a result of transportation progress. So I'm skipping through my notes here. It greatly reduces cognition, learning, and health while increasing agitation, violence, mental illness, overall morbidities, and mortalities. Transportation noise and pollution causes poor health, education, cognition, and safety, robs communities of hope, freedom, and economic vitality. Please actively pursue avoidance of transportation redlining, especially next to affordable housing, the homeless, and the elderly. Actively engage with the FAA to inform flight path for citizen protections. Stop pushing roads right up next to homes without installing noise barriers. Please consider getting the colleges involved. Give them hands-on training while protecting our community for statewide planning goal #1 recommendations. And I attached some studies that we find the aircraft attributable lead contributes $1.6 billion in annual damages. That's 2006. It's a lot more than that. I included an excellent learning tool from New York City, who's implementing a lot of noise protections because they've done a lot of studies and found how much it's costing their community from their transportation impacts. And I'm sending this email over. And another one that the publication estimates that the global cost of health damages associated with exposure to air pollution is 1.8 trillion, 6.1% of the global GDP. I just think it would be economically viable for our transportation committee to really, really proactively address pollution impacts before making changes. And if you see a disenfranchised community or where you know there's high crime rate, transportation pollution increases that. So just really pay attention to that. So those would be my suggestions. I'm sending over documents and links and studies and data in an email. So thank you for a chance to talk.
Thank you very much. And actually, can you state your name and address for the record so that we have you on our mailing list?
Yeah,
For item
Doreen.
or for updates about this particular item?
Yep, Doreen Ty, 62465 Powell Butte Highway, Bend, Oregon, 97701.
Thank you very much. Okay, so let's go and have our next Zoom participant elevated. It will take just a moment.
Good evening. My name's Nunzi Gould, 19845 JW Brown Road. My mailing address is Bend, but I live in Tumalo. So I would just like to share with you a couple things. People say they live in Bend when they may actually not live within the city limits of Bend. And it's important, I think, for the Planning Commission to distinguish when they're doing surveys, who they're surveying, and people's comments relate to their place of living or the broader community. For instance, placing growth in Deschutes County can mean placing growth in our cities and not necessarily in Deschutes County rural lands. And I am a proponent and support the comments of a prior person, Robin Vora, of developing our cities with the needs, housing, employment, schools, and leaving the rural area rural. We do not have a transportation plan that would get me on a bus from my home or even from an unincorporated community of Tumalo that would get me to Bend, as a for instance. I thought it was very interesting that the introduction was about growth and development. And I think we really have reached a nexus point that we need some conservation and preservation within our comprehensive plan. And I don't believe that just saying, oh, we're not doing wildlife because wildlife is okay, or we're not changing wildlife in this comprehensive plan, I think that completely sidesteps the needs of wildlife in our community. We continue to fragment wildlife habitat, and we continue to put disturbing developments near our eagle habitat in our community. And I don't believe we will have the opportunity for people to see wildlife, experience eagles when they're hiking, if we continue to place development and disregard the habitat needs of wildlife. Regarding the Tumalo community, I don't really understand why that's a separate process. Why are we taking off the table a collective look at our community now? And I'm not in favor of a sewer system in Tumalo. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Okay, are there other comments about the comprehensive plan update? Okay, so I'm not seeing any, and I am seeing Nicole Mardell coming back up, and I think now is the time I kind of just hand it back to you to address any comments or things that you would like to add.
Yeah, certainly, commissioners. So again, for the record, Nicole Mardell, I did just want to note one thing that I accidentally omitted from my opening remarks. I did want to note that we did add a few additional documents to our application materials section. So we did include our summaries for our round 1 and round 2 engagement activities. And then we also added our meeting in a box summary, just so that content from the process leading up to the creation of the document was available in the record. So you could access those as well. But otherwise, I don't have really anything to address in terms of the comments heard here tonight, but I welcome any questions and happy to walk through next steps.
Okay, great. Is there an email address you want to supply for people that maybe are listening and would like to email you any questions they have?
Certainly, yes. My email address is Nicole, Nicole, period, Mardell, Mardell at Deschutes.org.
Okay, great. All right. Anyone else, any last minute commenters on the comprehensive plan? Okay. Well, in that case, we will discuss our options. I guess I should ask, do any of the commissioners have questions for Nicole? Okay. We should probably move on then to our options. Our options are to close the hearing and set a date for deliberations, close the hearing and commence deliberations, close both the oral and written record, or close the oral record and leave the written record open. Is there a motion on how we might proceed?
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Cyrus?
I would move to close the hearing. Leave the written record open until 4 p.m. on 12/28 and commence deliberations at a future date to be determined based on what the calendar looks like in January or February.
Okay.
When is our next meeting as a commission?
So I believe our next meeting is the second week of January. Can I find out if there's a second to this motion first?
I would second.
Okay, Commissioner Altman had you by hair, so it's now been moved and seconded to close the hearing and leave the written record open until 4 p.m. on 12/28 and commence deliberations at a date to be determined.
Madam Chair,
Peter Gutowski?
Peter Gutowski, Community Development Director. The next meeting is correct. It's the second Thursday in the month of January, which is January 11th. And I think our strategy, as we've contemplated internally, is to bring back, it would be almost like a pre-deliberations meeting, allow the Planning Commission to identify issues that are separating where there's warrants additional discussion. And so I kind of will capture that as much as possible. And then it would, our thought was the following meeting, which would be the fourth Thursday of the month. So that would be my math is right, that's the 25th of January. It would allow the Planning Commission to start deliberation on those issues that have kind of been singled out at that time. It doesn't mean the Planning Commission couldn't identify an issue that just wasn't captured in that earlier conversation, but we prepare a matrix and just we're thinking about ways that can allow for a free-flowing conversation on the 11th. And then, as I mentioned, starting on the 25th, there would be an understanding of the issues that are, like I said, that are of the highest priority for the Planning Commission that warrant significant conversation and that would eventually put the commission in that position to ultimately make a formal recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners. It's important to note with everybody in attendance, anyone listening online, there is no deadline for the Planning Commission to ultimately make that recommendation. We want to provide as much time as you need to go through a very lengthy report that's received a lot of public input. And as Nicole has noted, the website has all of that information and the public processes that have been utilized. So that's our strategy on this topic, knowing that there will likely be another agenda item or two for your consideration in January. But we wanted to be mindful of your time as it pertains to this particular topic.
Okay, so we could amend the motion to include a date for the deliberations, or we could just discuss the motion and then vote on it as is. Is there
Could
any
I
discussion?
Could I suggest a friendly amendment?
Yes,
So we close the public hearing, we leave the written testimony open until December 28th at 4 p.m. And on our January 11th meeting, we start a pre-deliberation work session with a deliberation date determined after that work session.
okay. Is that
I'm good with that.
okay? And Commissioner Allman is okay, great. So is there discussion on this motion? Just a Commissioner Cyrus is the maker of the motion, so
No,
Okay.
I think we've had 3 public hearings. I think given the number of comments we had tonight, I think the public is hearinged out. And I think it's time to move on, and I agree with it makes sense to have a work session and then determine based on that when we want to do deliberations.
Vice Chair Hovkamp?
Why do we need the written record open for another 2 weeks?
Given, I guess my thought is, given the magnitude of what we're doing, just we're not going to be meeting for another month. If anybody that has something else they last minute they want to throw in, we've got plenty of time, and no point closing it tonight and then sit on it for a month.
We also did have a Zoom attendee who emailed some documents while she was talking, which is able to be included with this date.
Okay. I think technically, as long as the email's in before we take our vote, it would be okay, but I still agree with the motion to keep it open for till the 28th because of the reasons that Commissioner Cyrus articulated. Are there other comments on the motion? Discussion? Okay. In that case, we'll go ahead and vote, starting with Commissioner Kelly. How do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Altman?
Aye.
Commissioner Williams?
Aye.
Vice Chair Hovkamp?
Aye.
Commissioner Cyrus?
Aye.
I'll also vote aye, so that is unanimous, 6 in favor, 0 opposed. To go ahead and close the hearing, leaving the written record open until
Commissioner
4 p.m.
Trowbridge
on-
is present, just if
Oh,
anyone
Commissioner
didn't know.
Trowbridge is present?
Yes, he joined very
Oh.
early in the meeting.
I am here,
Oh, okay.
yes.
Can we
Sorry, I
speak
had some
up on
technical
the,
difficulties.
Is there a
Yeah,
way to get Commissioner Trowbridge onto the screen? It's okay.
There we
yeah,
go.
if-
Hold on. There we go.
There we go. There he is. Okay. Hi.
Hi.
Good to see you. I'm
Hello.
sorry for not realizing you were here. So,
That's okay.
um,
I didn't want to interrupt, so I didn't say anything. I thought maybe you would just see me pop on.
yeah, the screen is not showing my participants. But
Got it.
maybe the record could show that Commissioner Trowbridge was present as of early in the meeting. I think Commissioner Williams mentioned. So, Commissioner Trowbridge, how do you vote?
Aye.
Okay.
Yep.
So,
Sorry it's loud here. I have 2 puppies that are wrestling in the background, so
no worries.
I hear them.
Okay. So the motion has passed, 7 in favor, 0 opposed, to close the hearing, leaving the written record open until December 28th, or 4 p.m. and to have a pre-deliberations meeting on January 11th, 2024 to determine the date we will commence deliberations. Okay. So that's settled. We will move on to our continued public hearing for RVs as rental dwellings. And I will turn that over to Tanya Saltzman, Senior Planner.
Microphones grew since last time I was here. Good evening. My name is Tanya Saltzman. I'm a senior planner. As noted, I'm just going to apologize in advance. I'm fighting a cough, so if for some reason I have to run out of the room, it's not intentional. Excuse me, sorry. So I'm here tonight for the continued public hearing for RVs as rental dwellings, and I'm just going to share my screen here. All right. Yes, this is file number 247-23000-700 TA. And it's not advancing. Sorry. Does anybody know how to? Sorry, I'm going to stop sharing and restart. I'm not quite sure why this is doing this. My apologies.
Take your time.
It's different every time, I swear. Okay. All right. It's not quite as big, but I apologize. So the project website is available at www.deschutes.org/RV amendments. This is where the full record resides. So that includes every public comment that's been received, as well as all of the meeting materials and draft amendments. 35-day notice was provided to the Department of Land Conservation and Development as per procedure on October 4th. The first hearing for these amendments was held on November 9th, 2023. So this presentation is going to be a slightly shortened version of what I did on November 9th. So if any of you are watching again, it's going to be a repeat mostly, but I want to make sure that people understand what's at hand here. So, and Nicole already went over kind of the hearing procedures in terms of the Zoom and the participation. So I'll be doing a brief report, and then we'll allow for testimony both in person and in Zoom. And then if any closing remarks or questions and answers from the Planning Commission, that'll occur then. There will be a 3-minute limit per party. And again, anyone testifying via Zoom, please remember to provide your first and last name and your mailing address so we can be able to notify you with further developments. In person, please fill out a blue sign-up sheet. I think everyone's probably done that, and you could submit that to the chair. If you're testifying using Zoom, you have to raise your hand when it's time to provide testimony. You can use the raise hand feature to notify the chair that you're interested in testifying. If you're doing that, you'll experience a brief pause as you're transitioned from an attendee to a panelist. You'll be muted for a second. To do that on the phone, you'll dial *9. If you do that on the computer, you press the raise hand button. Written testimony can also be handed to me or emailed to me at my email address, tanya.saltzman@deschutes.org. That's TANYA.S as in Sam, ALTZMAN@deschutes.org. All right, now on to the proposal. This is a county-initiated proposal to adopt provisions to allow RVs, recreational vehicles, as rental dwellings in rural residential areas. And this all comes from Senate Bill 1013, which was adopted at the state level in July of 2023. As far as Senate Bill 1013 goes, this doesn't require a county to allow RVs. So the Planning Commission and ultimately the board can decide that this is not a direction they want to go in. The county is not compelled to allow RVs as rental dwellings. This just provides the basis by which to allow if the county so chooses. This legislation would only apply to rural unincorporated Deschutes County, so not the cities of Bend, Redmond, Sisters, or Lapine. They all have their own regulations concerning RVs. And some of you might have been tracking the rural ADU accessory dwelling unit process. In some ways, this does have some similarities. In some other ways, there are some differences. So I know that some comments we've received have conflated the two. I just want to make it clear that these are two separate processes, but it is understandable that they share some characteristics. So I'm going to go over the basic eligibility criteria first. So this is all directly from Senate Bill 1013. This would apply to rural residential exception areas. So in Deschutes County, that means RR10, MUA 10, SR 2.5, UAR 10, excuse me, and the West Side Transect Zone. It requires that one single family dwelling that's owner occupied as the primary residence has to be on the lot. So in other words, it can't happen on a vacant lot. There's other ways in the county where there are RVs for shorter amounts of time that can occur on a vacant lot, and that's a separate thing from the proposal at hand. There cannot be any other dwelling units on the property, so just that one single family dwelling, and no portion of the single family dwelling can be rented already as a residential tenancy. No portion of the lot or parcel can be within an urban reserve that's defined in the ORS. The RV must be owned or leased by the tenant, and I just want to pause briefly about this one. We as staff interpreted it in a certain way in the beginning, and we've since reached out to actually the co-sponsor of the bill, Senator Hayden, for clarification on what owned or leased by the tenant means. Originally, we thought that leased by the tenant was sort of like leasing a car. You lease your RV and then you bring it to this place to rent it. And that's actually not the case, because apparently leasing an RV is not a thing that you can do. You might be able to do a long-term rental from a private company, But the same way you can lease a car, it's not a thing with an RV. However, what they meant by leased by the tenant is that the owner of the property, so the one who's preparing this space to accommodate an RV, they can own the RV and lease it out just like you would lease out kind of a room in your house or an ADU or something like that. So in other words, you can come as the RV owner, bring your RV to someone's property and put it there, or the property owner already has the RV in place and it's just the person who's moving in. So I just want to provide that clarification. And if perchance Senator Hayden's staff is watching, thank you for that clarification. It was really helpful. A lot of these things that we deal with in planning is we're trying to interpret the state law, and sometimes it's very, very unclear. So it's really helpful to have literally the person who wrote it tell us what they meant. So thanks. So I just wanted to dwell on that for a second. Next, the property owner must provide essential services to the RV space. And this is defined in statute as sewage disposal, water supply, electrical supply, and if required by applicable law, any drainage system. This all has to be permitted by the county, go through the normal processes that you would do for any sort of electrical or sewage process or development action. The RV cannot be utilized as a short-term rental, so no vacation rentals. This is similar to the ADU legislation. This comes again directly from the state, so it cannot be used as an Airbnb, a VRBO, that type of thing. Now, a little bit more of the specific proposed amendments. The amendments that we have in the draft it's a combination of the requirements that I just went over from Senate Bill 1013, as well as some staff recommendations to address things like just health and safety issues and other issues that rose up to staff. We were coordinating within the Community Development Department with our on-site wastewater, our buildings department, concerns that they might have. So we added some of those provisions in. Per board direction or our interpretation of board direction, the goal in this, because the goal ultimately is to be able to provide some sort of affordable housing, a new type of housing, this draft avoids or tries to avoid extraneous regulations to make it as accessible as possible within reason, with still accommodating these concerns for health and safety and things like that. So in other words, this draft attempted to keep it fairly stripped down beyond those provisions of Senate Bill 1013. And we're going to present additional options for consideration that might be something that the Planning Commission might want to think about, but they're not currently in the draft code. But ultimately, the public process, so tonight, what we hear from people, what has been heard so far, the written comments, the Planning Commission's opinions, et cetera, that's going to determine the final content of what's in there. But I just wanted to clarify where this starting point came from. So just to dig into the amendments themselves, beyond the Senate Bill 1013 provisions, the amendments modify the existing definition in of RVs in our code. It just refers directly to the Oregon administrative rule. So this just keeps it clean. If the definition at the state level changes, it coincides with that. That OAR defines both a park model RV as well as a regular RV, mostly pertaining to fire certification. That can be certified either by the manufacturer if it's a relatively new vehicle, or there's a way to self-certify as well. Additional criteria that's included, and this is all coming from staff, a minimum 1 acre lot size. Now, I'll be clear that, again, I keep going back to the rural ADUs because you all have experience with that. The rural ADU legislation had a baked-in minimum acreage of 2 acres. The RV legislation does not. So there is no minimum acreage according to the state. Staff, based on concerns for septic and groundwater, recommended to adopt a 1 acre minimum across the board. Of course, this is up for consideration, but this is where we're starting from. Similar to those concerns and relating to the concerns for kind of wastewater and groundwater, the amendments require that the RV must have an operable toilet and sink. This is from our on-site wastewater division. They're regarding this provision as a way to provide essentially permanent housing to people. So it, in their opinion, should be providing the amenities, if you call them amenities, that any sort of housing would provide. The property owner must provide a parking pad for the RV that's made of either compacted gravel, concrete, or asphalt. That's just for stabilization purposes. If the RV is going to be located within a structure, the structure has to be open on 2 or more sides. This is just for concerns of exhaust and fire and things like that. And then similarly, for fire concerns, the RV must be at least 10 feet from all other structures. This is just a very tiny map of the general eligibility, and this is just using the very baseline criterias in the zones that are allowed, and 1 acre properties that have a single family dwelling already. There's about 12,410 properties right now in the rural county that theoretically could be eligible. Of course, there's always individual site concerns and septic and things like that, but this is the very baseline to give a sense of the scale that we're thinking about here. And then there's an additional 2,900 properties in those zones that are 1 acre. They're currently vacant. So they're not eligible. They wouldn't be eligible today, but if they had a single family dwelling on them, then they would become eligible. And as you can see, they're kind of spread all over the county. That's the blue splotches. As far as goal 5 and wildlife resources, this proposal is introducing what's called a conflicting use. So it's a new use in these zones under our goal 5 requirements, which in this case is addressing wildlife habitat. So to the extent that those goals of goal 5 applies, we are addressing the RVs as a conflicting use in the findings which accompany the amendments. The zoning code in this proposal are being amended to allow RVs as rental dwellings. So therefore, they're subject to this analysis in EC, economic, social, environmental, and energy analysis. And that's a decision-making tool. Planning Commission is very familiar with that by this point, I think, but it's a way to kind of weigh the benefits and the potential issues with allowing this new use and how it relates to economic, social, environmental, and energy analysis in these areas that might overlap with wildlife habitat. So the EC will evolve as these amendments also evolve, but that is part of the findings package, and you'll see that in the amendments package. Additional options, I'm just going to run over these fairly quickly. In Senate Bill 1013, it provides a few kind of extras on the menu that the county can consider adding. They're not currently in the current draft, but if the Planning Commission has an interest in recommending them, that is of course doable. They can require the registration of the use with the county. They can require to enter into a written residential rental agreement with the tenant. So something written, it can't just be a verbal rental agreement. And then lastly, the county could choose to limit the amount of payment that the property owner may accept from the tenant to those reasonably necessary to cover the owner's loss or cost or losses. Essentially, that's a kind of a rent control type of thing. If they want to cap it and say, you're not allowed to make some huge profit on it, you have to have it, keep it to just what the expenses are. The county is within their purview to be able to do that if they elect to kind of adopt this portion of the law. Additional things for consideration that aren't in the draft right now, and we did receive some input on these in the last public hearing, and that was extremely helpful. Should the property owner be required to provide storage for the tenant? Should the RV have to be screened from neighboring properties, whether that's fencing or landscaping or that type of thing, or any other concerns? Testimony received thus far. Staff has received 24 written comments, an additional 8 since the last hearing. 9 of them were in favor, generally supporting, it's a financial opportunity for property owners and would help provide housing in the county where there is a housing crisis. 14 were opposed, concerns for property values and the rural character in the county. A lot of people were worried about code enforcement, citing a lot of the illegal RVs that are already out there. Concerns about water, concerns about traffic, and concerns about fire. And then one comment was addressing other issues. And I believe we had about 12 people testify at the last hearing. And those are all, of course, going to be summarized once it's time for deliberations, and we'll go more into the details on that. So I've spoken for too long, so I'm going to go into the process and the next steps. The options to move forward after the testimony this evening. continue the hearing to a date certain, close the hearing and leave the written record open to a date certain, close the hearing and set a date for deliberations, or close the hearing and commence deliberations immediately. With that, thank you, and I'll turn it over to the Planning Commission.
Okay, great. Do any of the commissioners have a question for Tanya Saltzman? Vice Chair Hopkamp?
Couple, if you would, please, Tanya. Trying to track some of these, the 1 acre minimum, did you say that's consistent with the new rural ADU regs, or that's 2 acres?
The rural ADUs are, well, first of all, the rural ADUs, it was written into the Senate bill as a 2 acre minimum. And the rural ADUs where it landed it was mostly 2 acres. And then in South County, a minimum of 5 acres. So this 1 acre is different from the rural ADUs. Our septic expert explained that essentially, although it's another dwelling from an RV, the flow is different because it's concentrated and it's generally smaller, but he had reasons for having some sort of minimum acreage. So 1 acre is where that landed.
Okay. Do you see a disadvantage with having that inconsistency there, or confusion of having an acre? Or maybe that's not fair to ask you that. I don't know.
I mean, I can answer it. I don't know if it's, it's a different type of use. While the intention of the use, of course, is to provide another dwelling in some capacity, it is a different shape essentially. So I don't think it's necessarily confusing to the user, because they'll be looking at that code and that'll be kind of baked in.
Okay. Can I ask you another couple questions? Is that all right?
Yes.
Clarification. You mentioned some of the requirements for essential services like septic service, operable toilets and sinks. How is that ensured? I imagine it's not just complaint driven, that there's a permitting before occupancy process that's similar to other residences, or
Exactly. So the way, and we're still hammering out the details of the permit process in terms of the phasing of it, but in general, the property owner essentially, it's kind of like they're building a mini RV park for one. So they have to prepare this, could be in a pedestal like it would be at an RV park that has that electrical connection, the wastewater and the sewage, and that all has to go through the permitting process. So you're putting in a circuit or something, I'm not an electrical expert. That has to go through the county permitting process. You have to get a septic evaluation to see if your existing system can handle that additional flow, or if you have to expand your system. So very similar to ADUs. So there will be a permitting process for that.
okay. And then a last one, and I know we want to get to the public testimony, but quickly, I think I'm pretty sure I asked this before, and I'm spacing on the answer. A minimum, the current suggestion is for a minimum of 10 feet sighting from the primary residence. And I asked this before, I think, but thinking back to the ADU regulations about a maximum of 100 feet, what is the reasoning, if there is one, to maybe not have a maximum distance as well from the primary residence? Can you remind me of your answer?
That's a good question. So the 10-foot distance is meant for fire purposes, because RVs can, if something catches on fire, they just want it to have some sort of separation distance, and that came from our building division. That 100-foot envelope, and what the commissioner is speaking of, is ADUs, and this was part of the legislation, is the ADU has to be within a certain distance of the main house, of the primary dwelling. I would say the first thing is that there is nothing pertaining to that in the state law for RVs. That is an option that the Planning Commission could go down that road. But to me, those two things are separate. One is for fire reasons, and one is for more keeping things clustered. So they're just kind of two different things. But if, I believe there might have been some testimony to that end about the RVs. That is something the Planning Commission could certainly consider, is having some sort of envelope to keep everything together.
Thank you for those answers, Tom.
You're welcome.
All right, great. Other questions for Tanya Saltzman? Commissioner Williams?
So I know that there is a permitting process for the septic and all that, but you just mentioned as an extra or an add-on, a registration of use. Can you clarify or expand on that?
A little. Yes, that's something that was built into to the Senate bill. And to me, and I don't know if Will has any thoughts on this, for us, the person doing the RV would still have to go through an application process with the county in the first place. So I don't know exactly what a register of the use would necessarily be. And here comes Will Groves, our planning manager, to give his opinion on it. It was a little vague in my opinion.
Will Groves, your planning manager? Yes. It is a little vague. I'm not sure what they were specifically trying to allow for with a register of the use. I think maybe the notion being, something like short-term rentals in some jurisdictions have business licenses associated with them, or some other that, we've chosen, at least at the outset, to look towards some sort of land use process to verify this. And at the same time, that type of process isn't mandated. So you can imagine a jurisdiction taking a really hands-off approach to this and saying, just sign up and let us know that you're doing this, and here's a handout of what's expected for you as an association with this use. So I think that there's a possibility of, that people have to in some way be signed up or registered that they're engaged in this use, and our land use application process certainly covers that level of connection, being able to track and be aware of both the use itself, how many of them out there, the compliance, and also making that available. So for code compliance, for example, if there were questions about the use.
So did the state clarify that this RV could be registered as an on-site business? Or specifically it could, because you mentioned short-term versus business license. So a little more clarity on whoever co-wrote this bill. What are they trying to establish? Does the homeowner need to get a business license in order to run this as a rental? They
did not specify.
Okay, versus someone running a business out of it.
I mean, they're not requiring that right now. It just says a county may require that an owner of a lot or a parcel who cites an RV under this section register the use with the county. That's all they say. So it's not, to me, it doesn't imply that it needs to be a business license. But we can certainly follow up with the senator and see if there's any additional details. I think in general, in my conversations with them, their intent was to provide housing, their goal is housing. So they really wanted to make this as flexible as possible. So I think that their goal was to just make this as accommodating as possible. My hunch is that they're not trying to add additional hoops, but that's just my own personal interpretation of what they said to me.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, other questions before we move on to, yes, Commissioner Altman.
I have a couple of questions. And I don't know if you know the answer. If you don't, I could email it to you to get it in the record. Do you know, within city limits, general, let's say Bend, how many houses on average are built in a new development?
Could you clarify that?
So if you have a new Hayden Homes development going up on, 40 acres, do you know how many houses they would build there? And I ask because if there are 12,000 potential lots that would be available to have RVs put on them, one new housing development probably doesn't have 12,000 houses. So I'm just wondering, to equate this to sort of like a cluster development, how many possibly people would we be adding to rural residential areas?
I mean, that's a tricky one because it depends on the lot size. Right. It depends on their, there's so many different permutations of what within the city they can do. I can't really answer that.
And then would there be a limit on the number of residents in an RV?
That's not in the proposed, that's not in our draft. No, not at this time.
And then there is an upper limit on size.
Yeah, the way the RVs are, there's a the way they're categorized in the OAR, there's a certain width, and the park models, which are generally larger, have a square footage. So yeah, they can't be some, and they have to be titled with the Department of Transportation. So there are kind of limits on that.
Commissioner Kelly?
Yes, I have a question. So since RV, let's say that, so you permit an RV with the tenant, and the tenant owns the RV, they bring it to the site, the county comes out and reviews that it meets the standards. Well, and then a year later, they've decided to move and you bring another tenant in with their own RV. You have to then get a new permit and go through, I'm imagining, that same inspection process.
That's a really good question. What we're contemplating right now is sort of a two-phased permit process. So one is for the space. So that's where the electric hookup, the sewer, all of that kind of the infrastructure, the gravel pad, all of that stuff. And then the other would be based on sort of either the tenant or the RV. So making sure that's when you would make sure that there's a toilet in the RV. It's focused on the RV itself, because obviously those can come and go. That's the way we're envisioning it right now, to capture both of those things, because recognizing that the RV and the RV might change. The pad wouldn't. They would be on the site plan and it would be, acknowledged as part of the property. But that RV would trigger another phase of that permit to make sure that that's in compliance.
That makes sense, the two phase. My other question is, and like my ongoing kind of concern about the RVs as permanent dwellings, is winters in Central Oregon are hard on RVs, and pipes freeze. And, as if you are a landlord of a traditional rental, you have to provide a certain standard of living. And let's say that these RVs, I think they're bound to freeze. I've noticed that people, you put up the straw bales and you do all the insulation you can to make it, to prevent that. But is then the onus on the landlord? I'm just trying to imagine, how do you make it a safe and living space when we have winters that are so harsh?
That's something that we've been kind of discussing. And I think the answer is that happens in the rental agreement. That happens somewhere between the landlord and the tenant. It's not part of our land use, our zoning per se. It's kind of beyond the purview of what we can touch necessarily. If anyone disagrees with me, you can let me know. But I think that, the property owner would have some sort of agreement, if they're providing essential services, they're providing sewer and water. So maybe they would agree to provide something else, or require that the tenant has to have some sort of something that makes their stuff stop for freezing. I think it's beyond the scope of the zoning text.
Okay. And I'd be curious if there was people in the audience that could comment about how they deal with winters, because to me it's a concern.
Yeah. And it's also possible that maybe if someone's the property owner, they only allow people to rent not in the winter. I don't know who decides to do that, but I think there's a lot of flexibility, but it's not something that the county can necessarily dictate.
Commissioner Trowbridge, you had your Zoom hand raised.
Yes, I had a couple. One of my questions was, how would the county even begin to regulate the rental amount without understanding like electrical cost of a specific unit? It just seems like getting into that rent control thing. I mean, how would you even begin to monitor and regulate that? That's one of my questions as far for that one.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. It's something that if the planning commission or the board wanted to go in that direction, we would have to figure that out. And we don't have the answer right now, because that is not part of the initial draft. It's an option in the Senate bill. If that is appealing to any of our hearings bodies, then that's when we would explore how that would be done. But right now it's not in the amendments that are proposed.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a non-answer, but
okay. Yeah, that seems like it'd be a tough one. I get throwing it out there, but because it'd be hard. Yeah. And then my other question is the 1 acre minimum. One thought I have is would there be an ability for people to apply for a variance? So, and again, I always come back to DRW. There's about 2,200 0.96 acre lots in DRW that are close to town. have good soil for septics. And it's just one of the things where I see like that 0.4 of an acre could eliminate some close to town opportunities that don't have soil and water table issues. I get it with South County, it makes a lot of sense, but just that close, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and
just
that's
the
a concern
question
that
I
was
have.
voiced by at least one written comment, and I think she might be on Zoom, who's going to testify to that end as well. There is a variance process for a minor variance that maybe Will can shed more light on, but that is a possibility to do that if you're at, you know, a 0.98 or a 0.99 acre. But the
Yeah,
line
I think a
ultimately
lot of
does
them
have to be drawn somewhere. But yeah, there are ways that you could try to get other options.
And then another question would be like OW 2, it's, I don't know, there's 500 plus half acre lots that actually have sewer and water. So it would eliminate all that. That would be a good opportunity because you don't even have to worry about groundwater because there's a public sewer system in there. These are just thoughts I have, like, and I know that's saying there's 12,000 lots that could possibly be viable to do it. Probably not everyone would do that, obviously. But that was just another thought I have of eliminating properties that could be a good option with no impact. Just thinking that through as well, as far because the state did not put a limit, correct, on the lot size.
Correct. So the world is your oyster technically. So yeah, the 1 acre is just meant as a starting point. So that's absolutely something that could be brought up in the deliberations process to kind of hone in on that or parse that out a little bit more to accommodate those types of lots for sure.
Yeah, because it's could we look at it on a neighborhood by neighborhood, as you know, that would have been a great neighborhood as well, OW2 for ADUs because there's sewer and water. And
I'm just going to interrupt and say, we'll have to save our comments and deliberations for the deliberation time, but those are really good questions and I'm glad you asked them. And do you have any other questions before we? Okay.
Nope. I don't have any more.
Okay, Commissioner Altman.
I just had one more question to follow up on Commissioner Kelly's comment about winterization and concerns about winterization. I think I remember from the last meeting that it would not be allowed to essentially build an enclosed shop, a fully enclosed shop, and then just drive it in there and park it. That is not allowed.
The building department did not, you know, for instance, put it in a garage and live in it because of reasons for exhaust and things like that. They said that was a no-go. Maybe there's a potential for, and we were tossing this around in the very beginning, people could build some sort of ramada, you know, a little shelter thing. That might not necessarily be a requirement as noted in the zoning code, but maybe that's something that's also in the rental agreement or that type of thing. But I think there are ways to do it. It's just, but it can't be fully enclosed. That's correct.
All right. So are we ready to move on to our public comments? Okay. So the first blue sheet that I have here is from Alan Shaw. So if Alan can come on up. And we have your address here is 60451 Umatilla Circle in Bend, Oregon. Awesome. Okay.
Okay, thank you. I'll try to be very brief. My concerns really primarily revolve around the bandwidth of the permitting process. Do we have the resources available to really dissect this issue fully and to be able to get in there and do proper permitting? I forget, one of the questions that was brought up from the commissioners was are we permitting the ground, the facility, or are we permitting the RV, or are we doing both? And so it feels to me like that's a very complex issue, and that those RV requirements really need to be looked at very closely and carefully. The other concern I have is, as much as I like to have faith in human nature, I see that people are sneaky. And, so somebody might bring in an RV that is perfect for the space, and then a month later they sell it. So now that any new RV that's brought in has to be re-permitted again, what's the word I'm looking for?
Evaluated.
My mind's drawn a blank. They'd have to go in and go over that one. And again, and I'm really concerned about, again, the bandwidth and the resources on the part of the county to be able to be doing this on an ongoing rolling basis. So, and then, on the code enforcement end of it as well, I've seen other circumstances in other cities where people have been allowed to use RVs as rentals and they were not up to code. And it was very difficult for code enforcement to then go in and get things rectified. And so that's really primarily where my concerns lie.
Great. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Okay. Next up, we've got Ruby Swanson. Also at 60451 Umatilla.
Yes. A couple of things. Oh, shoot. Glasses. There was no mention of trash requirements. And I think that that's really important that I know that my neighbor and several neighbors in DRW do not have trash pickup. They have a trailer and they put it in bags and put it in a trailer and then the Ravens pick at it. There needs to be a requirement. If you're going to have a rental unit, I don't think that you should be allowing pets due to the wildlife, goal 5 stuff. I think pets, there are a lot of pets, a lot of pets and wildlife in DRW. And I can see that potentially being a really big problem. Last year, we had a neighbor that killed a fawn and a doe in the canal. And so that was an issue. I don't really know what was resolved from that. I've tried to find out and I couldn't. The other issue that I have is there was no mention of roads in this whole plan. There's several local access roads with no maintenance, no plowing, major potholes, pollution. There's pets and wildlife. There's all kinds of problems with that, and nobody takes care of that road. And if you start increasing the traffic on those little teeny roads, and there's people already there's no speed limit. There's so many people that speed down these roads. Everybody complains about it with the dust and the pollution from the dust, which we know is bad for your health. It's an asthmatic issue. And if you're not asthmatic, you will become asthmatic. And that goes with ash and dust or whatever, pollen, blah, blah, blah. I still am a big advocate. I had a neighbor who put up an RV, and his RV was put literally 4 feet from my property line. And it was so disrespectful and very noisy. I mean, he was nice, but he was just very noisy. And I just felt like I still am a firm believer you shouldn't be renting anything out that's close to the property line. It should have a buffer zone of like 75 feet. If you want to rent an RV, you put it in your driveway and you listen to, their music, their kids crying and the swearing and the cussing, everything that goes on with, there should be a limit to how many people are living in this RV. And I don't think they should be allowed to have pets because of the wildlife situation. There's several problems that I have with this, but there was no mention of property lines in this deal. And I just hope that somebody adds something there too. I can't imagine how you put so many RVs and so many properties.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. Okay, our next person is Brenda Schwerin. Oh, Shireen. Okay.
Correctly on the form, but
I can see it now.
how's it are spelled?
Yeah, thank you. And I've got 61415 South Highway 97 for your
Correct, 97702. I want to thank you. I don't know about everybody else, but I'm excited to be here. I've been living in a tiny house RV for 7 years. So you can ask me anything. I think I've been through the experience. The only experience I haven't been through is I haven't lived rurally on a property. And to have this opportunity for this to come up is very exciting for me, because I think I would have done so had the laws been passed before. So I say totally yes to allowing tiny house RVs in our rural county. And my experience is quite extensive. It goes way back to 2016 when during a divorce, my father passed and then my mother was disabled, and I had to leave my partner, travel across the states by myself. And that was at 50 plus age, and help my mother, who was disabled and couldn't help herself. And when I landed where she lived, I found out that I was disabled, homeless, and unemployed. And I was a freelancer, but I was having a very difficult time just keeping that up while taking care of my mother by myself. And I actually, after seeing, I just saw a book in a bookstore on tiny house RVs, and it just, the bell went off, the lights went off, and everything went off. And I said, that's it. That's the way that I will be able to live and be able to take care of my mother. So I found a builder, had a tiny house built. And since 2016, I was able to take care of my mom until she passed. And I was living affordably, and I was 50 plus disabled and a freelancer. So I can testify for that. Now I'm 60 plus. And I live here in Bend, and I'm retired, and I lived on a fixed income in my beloved tiny house here. And to see this opportunity come up is very exciting. I might move again. But there isn't a night that I don't go grateful for having a roof over my head. And I think that's what this is really about. It's a very emotional topic for me, but we need more housing. Everybody, youth, us retired folk, everybody, people who work, and this lifestyle, actually living in a tiny house RV, people can work remotely, which has been so helpful. I also, through all my trials and tribulations, I actually am an advocate now, and I help others in kind of a service that I'm like paying it forward now. And so I help other people through my experience that I've had in tiny house RV living to, answer their questions, to guide them and give them referrals, and tell them my experience through social media on the trials and tribulations. I'm mostly a positive writer, but I will tell them about winterizing your RV and give them as many tips as I can. Well, if I did it wrong, here's what I did. Here's what you can do to do it right and less expensive.
So unfortunately, we're out of time.
Oh, okay.
But thank you very much.
All right.
We
Thank you
really
for
appreciate hearing your
giving me
story.
the opportunity. So
Yeah.
I totally vote 100% for this.
Thank you. Okay, our next person is Alexis Stevens. I've got your address at 16388 3rd Street, number 41.
Hello. I'd like to voice my support for RVs as rental dwellings. As both a former tiny house RV dweller and now a Deschutes County homeowner. In a county with expensive and limited housing options, many county residents struggle to survive in an area where they work, including my favorite barista. This also includes folks like me and my partner who are small business owners. By tiny house RV, I want to clarify that it was built to RV building standards. So it's a type of RV like fifth wheels and truck campers are RV types. You can build a, in quotes, tiny house to residential code on foundation, etc. But what I'm talking about is tiny house RVs. So living in our RV in a backyard of a kind Bend family allowed us to live affordably and to save up to buy a house. The homeowners who hosted us were grateful for the extra income to help pay their mortgage, and they were also appreciative of the friendly, neighborly relationship we all had, and for the help that we did around the property. And all our immediate neighbors had a friendly relationship with us and a favorable view of our RV situation. And we were probably 20 feet from the primary house and maybe 15 feet from the property line. Our land host provided us with a 30 amp RV outlet, a sewer clean out, and for water, we connected to their frost protected outdoor spigot with a heated hose. And we never had any freezing water issues. Our floors are also very well insulated, and that varies from RV to RV, but there are other things that people can do like skirting that can help with those issues. And there are numerous folks who are examples of living comfortably year round in RVs in the many RV parks in our county as well. Holding tanks with the pump out service is one of the many alternative sewage disposal options that might be worth considering, because those are currently being used across many recreational properties in the county. So they're readily available. Our host did not provide specific storage for us, but they did allow us the option to have a small shed next to our RV. Additionally, they did not install any kind of pad, but we put down pavers on the ground to go under our RV stabilizers, which was sufficient. So please consider to allow that option. Gravel pads are great also. They're both more economical than a concrete pad. And we comfortably fit on their half-acre property, like I said, with the spacing noted earlier. I would love it if you guys would consider allowing RVs on half-acre and three-quarter-acre properties, because it would open up more parking opportunities. And because I think with the 12,000 available properties, not all the landowners are going to be up for this arrangement. And also there's a lot of impediments like trees and whatnot. And regarding being like something like 75 feet from a property line, I don't see that as realistic, because I just know on my 1.25 acre property, because of where trees are, I would have to cut down a lot of trees to make that possible. And that's a undue expense also.
Hate to interrupt, but we're.
Oh, no problem.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for your consideration.
And thanks very much for the testimony. Okay, next person is Christian Parsons. 16388 3rd Street, number 411. Lapine, 97739.
As a Deschutes County homeowner, I would like to voice my support for RV rental dwellings. Before owning a house, I lived in a tiny home RV with my girlfriend for 7 years. This gave us the opportunity to live within our means, start our own business, and save up for a home. I know there are countless more RV dwellers in the county who can afford to live and work here because they live in an RV. Renting a spot from a homeowner offers a mutually beneficial financial agreement. Of course, as long as the property owner isn't charging market rate 1-bedroom apartment rents. I think it's a good idea to have guidelines for lot rent costs as well as a rental agreement. Across the entire county, many RVs are currently stored in plain sight on residential property. So I don't see a need for requiring a privacy screen, which can be a cost burden, but it can always be an option for the homeowner or the renter. With that said, I do think many RV rentals can easily be parked in a way that naturally provides a level of privacy between them, the homeowner, and the neighbors. Thank you for your time and considering the RV as a rental dwelling. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Okay, Jeffrey Hubley? Did I say it right? I just had to know. Okay, I've got your address is PO Box 141 in Terrebonne, 97760.
Yep. I just want to thank you guys again for continuing to be looking into this, taking it very seriously, and I also want to show my support for the proposal as well. I do think it's a good solution for more affordable housing and a route for current RV dwellers to be living legally across the county. There was some questions about the definition of RV, and after doing a little bit of research, it seems like what would concern me the most, which is the tiny house RV, will be able to be under that umbrella if we're using the DMV definition, which allows you to self-certify that it meets the requirements and register it as an RV with the state of Oregon, which is my current understanding. But yeah, I just wanted to make sure that I voiced support for making sure that that definition was inclusive enough for tiny house RVs, but also converted vehicles like buses, because I know that a lot of converted buses for livable spaces are very good for people, and that's something that are built to RV standards that could be used as well. As far as just some other points, I think I would support that online comment about including more smaller acres within the proposal, just like especially like the 0.99 acres. It seems like a very small switch of the cutoff could include a lot more parcels, which would open up great opportunities for landowners. For the permitting, I guess I just would support as much streamlined permitting as we can. With RV renters, there's a lot of more seasonal RV renters, so they'll be, coming in the spring and, leaving in the fall and that type of thing. So I guess I would say that, I could see it bottlenecking with permitting and just making sure that that's an option. I think I would also support the trash requirements that were brought up. Having to take your trash in your car out with you to dispose of isn't fun and not cost efficient. As far as the rent limit goes, even though it would benefit me, I'm not sure I fully support that. And I just think it would be one more deterrent potentially. So I'm not sure exactly where I stand with that. And then, yeah, I guess I just want to once again say thank you for considering this. I think that if someone is willing to rent their property out for me to park my house there, I think they should be allowed to do that. And I think I should be allowed to legally live there. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Okay, so that's all the blue sheets I have. Is there anyone else in person who wants to give a comment? Okay, so I know we have some folks on Zoom. So we have two folks there's three folks with their Zoom hands raised. So if you're listening on Zoom and you also would like to comment on this issue, go ahead and raise your Zoom hand, and we will just elevate you one by one to a panelist and hear your comment. And since I don't have a blue sheet for the people testifying on Zoom, if you could please state your name and address for the record so we can send you updates about this particular issue.
Hi. Doreen Ty again. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi. Thanks for giving me another chance to talk. I am supportive of this, of getting the RVs on private properties. The amendment, sorry. I obviously didn't have anything pre-written here, but I do think it needs more defined controls for farm and rural protections, such as removal of trash. I share many of the concerns I heard Ruby state. I also think that we need to be really careful to have controls in place to protect livestock on rural lands and farming. I mean, that can become really complicated really fast if somebody moves a trailer right up to your livestock or your farming processes. The RVs usually do come with some kind of recommended capacity. I wonder if you guys could implement that. I do worry about cost versus affordability, as stated by one of the commissioners, in different words, like road maintenance. If they're dirt roads and back roads, that could really escalate traffic. and staff maintenance, but also, you know, how do you put enough fees on that to make it, to meet the county's funding needs and keep it affordable for owners and to take that step. And I was wondering, have you consulted with any of the RV park managers on what they require for tenant maintenance versus what they stay responsible for? I know someone who was living in an RV park, there were certain products they couldn't put in the septic because that would mess up their system. And I kind of wonder if you sought the advice of one of the RV managers in the area that could really provide some guidance on you guys's what you want to implement there. So those are just my thoughts listening. I haven't looked through the proposal. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Okay, who's our next Zoom person?
Hello again, Nancy Gould, 19845 JW Brown in rural county with a Bend address. I would like the opportunity to have a public hearing when you have actually finished the language of this proposed text amendment. I think you're asking us to comment on something that isn't even in a final draft form, and this is the second public hearing. And so I would ask that you hold another public hearing when you've got the wording and the definitions and the sizes and the criteria and the licenses or whatever all is going to be added into this smorgasbord. I think this has been pretty fast tracked, and I think it really needs to be written properly so it can be enforced by your code enforcement, because you don't actually implement your code. Your code is complaint enforced, and it all befalls the neighbors, the citizens, and your code staff. So there have been a lot of terms that have just been thrown out there without some definitions of what you mean. We're talking about affordable. What is that? Like, what does the county rent their RV park pads for? Is that the comparison? Is it based on an AMI percentage? So without that, the sky's the limit. And I think it's unfair to ask people to comment if you're using terms that are not defined. Your staff talked about accessible. Does that mean ADA? Or does that just mean available to somebody? You've talked about a ramada, and that's not allowed through the tax assessor to be built anymore. You've talked about a structure, but you haven't addressed if that needs a building permit. Is it a rent control thing? I don't know how to give comment until your draft actually has some defining characteristics to it. Is it 1 acre? Is it 0.96 acres? What is it exactly? This really needs to get worded by your planning commission. That's what planning is. You write the plan and then you take public comment, not kind of the other way around, just to streamline the thing. So I think staff and your commission need to read this, get a draft, and then send a notice to the public, all the public. We're all impacted by this, like you did on the wildlife text amendment.
So we're unfortunately out of time.
So I don't believe you've notified the rural county. And I think this is an example of where public notice needs to be sent to all of the public.
Okay, so we're totally overtime at this point, so I have to stop you just out of fairness for everyone.
That's fine.
Thank you. Okay, let's get our next Zoom participant, please. They go into the Zoom void and then they reemerge. I think it might have been in the last meeting where you guys were talking about the Zoom void. I did watch the video, see?
What? There's a funny video?
Oh no, the video of the meeting I missed because I was sick last time. You're like, I want to watch the video.
Hi, this is Patty Lopez. I was one of the people that wanted to speak. Can you hear? You can't
Oh,
see me.
I can hear you now. I can't see you, but
Okay, well,
I can hear you.
not much point in me putting my makeup on, but anyway. Okay, yeah, I sent the commissioners a letter. I'm just really excited that this is being proposed,
Can you
especially.
speak up just a little bit? One of our commissioners is having a hard time hearing.
Okay.
And also,
I-
can you state your name and address for the record as well? Sorry to
Yeah,
interrupt.
Patricia Lopez, P.O. Box 2954, La Pine, Oregon 97739. I was very excited to hear this is being proposed, especially because I've lived in La Pine. I've worked in La Pine for 25 years, and we have a serious homeless problem, a serious lack of affordable rentals, and a lot of people that are having trouble making their mortgage payments. So this seemed like a wonderful solution to those problems until I started to look and talk to my neighbors about if they were on a full acre. And many of us between south of State Rec Road and north of Burgess Road in that area, not outside of the city, are sitting on what's zoned as, or what's been calculated at 0.99 or 0.97. And what adds to this in addition is that I've been told by Deschutes County a few years ago, the planning department, that when a lot of these properties up here were subdivided, there wasn't a lot of accuracy in the property lines. And one of my neighbors at 0.97 had a neighbor next to her that was at 0.97 and had it surveyed, and it came out at 1.06. So I'm feeling what with this particular area in South County really needing something like this. I'm really asking that there be a change to that 1 acre minimum to make it really fair and equitable. Not all of us can afford to have a professional survey done. I know there's a possibility of a variance, but that is also costly. So I'm just wanting to communicate that to the commissioners and hope that they will give that some consideration. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Okay, do we have another participant? Okay. Okay. So it looks like we've heard from everyone who wanted to give a comment on this issue. Am I correct? If not, raise your Zoom hand or your real life 3-dimensional person hand. Come on up. And if you can just state your address, that would be great.
I'm Christina Culver, PO Box 141, Terrebonne. I just want to state again that I spoke at the last meeting, but I'm still in support of this. And we've kind of already been hearing about some of that acreage minimum as well. So yeah, maybe looking at like a 0.5 or a 0.75, I think would be useful. I get the idea of cutting it off somewhere, but I do think that 1 acre, since we're not tied to that, there's no reason if there's all these properties just in that border not to include them. And then just to speak to some winterization, there's definitely like a lot of steps that you can take with different insulations to make it comfortable living. Previous to living in Oregon, in my tiny house RV, I was in Minnesota where we saw negative 40-degree weather and we still comfortably lived in it without any issues of freezing. So there's definitely ways to go around that. And just with the proper materials, you can achieve that. So just stating, thanks again for considering all this and look forward to more meetings about it.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, any Zoom hands? Okay, come on up.
Hi, my name is Edgar. I live at 65411 Klein Falls Road. I heard some concern about setbacks. It sounded like, and I guess I was under the impression that the RV would have to be set back appropriately for a residential building. So whatever the setback is, on my property, which is MUA 10, the setback is actually, I believe, 100 feet because the on all three sides of me, my neighbors have farm deferral, and so the setback changes from 50 feet to 100 feet, and that's so I didn't know about that until after I bought the property, and anyway, so as far as setbacks, I don't know if you guys know about setbacks and sort of farm deferral changing that, but I could see that at least in rural residential properties like mine potentially being an issue. But just wanted to add that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, anyone else who has not yet spoken this evening? Okay, so Tanya Saltzman, can we have you back up here? Oh, you're fine. And if you have to step out, we understand.
It starts, it just doesn't stop.
Yeah, no worries. So there were a couple questions I think that we had that were kind of phrased as sort of like clarifying things. I've got, can you address the tiny house RV definition? Is that consistent with our DMV definition? And can you speak to that?
Yes.
I'll field these if you jump in if I'm, yeah, I'm gonna cover for Tanya here. So we are, as part of this proposal, staff is proposing to align us exactly with the DMV definitions. Having those be separate was, we have our own local code that was based on an older DMV definition, so we're going to synchronize those.
Okay, does that address you guys' questions about? Okay, getting a thumbs up. Excellent.
Wait, could I don't think I understood.
Yeah.
Can you clarify more on, because last meeting where I was like, it was kind of discussed, the RV and a tiny home are different. Can you
So a
clarify
tiny home
that?
can be, it can be titled as an RV or a park model RV if it meets certain criteria. A lot of that is fire certification. I think if you're building something that's kind of out there, that might not, is basically the DMV is the gatekeeper in this case. So there are tiny homes that can fit under that definition. People build them specifically to comply with those RV standards, and that's what would be eligible.
Okay. And then we also just had a question clarifying if like current existing setbacks for residential buildings would apply to go ahead. Would apply to the RVs.
And as proposed, they would, but it's important to note that and those sort of vary as you've heard some testimony. So when you're on an MUA 10 zone property, a dwelling has to be set back 100 feet from an EFU zone property. I think that's the maximum setback that you would see under these scenarios. The minimum that you would see certainly is in an RR10 zone, you could have a 10-foot side setback. So under the current code as proposed, this RV could be as little as 20 feet away from a neighboring house. If the neighboring house was at its 10-foot side setback and the RV was also at a 10-foot side setback, the minimum under the current code would be 20 feet that this would be set back from an adjacent residence. And something that staff had considered in the proposal was the question if there should be some sort of clustering effect. So a requirement that that the RV be located within some sort of radius of the dwelling or some sort of increased setback. It seems like under the ADU code, one of the clustering provisions was trying to ensure that the on-site residence was the most strong experiencer of impacts and thus had, a good incentive to keep those under control. And you could imagine, you could have a 10-acre property where your house was, 1,000 feet or, hundreds of feet away from the RV that might be 10 feet from a property line. And so something for the planning commission to consider is if there's an appropriate either radius constraint adjacent to the dwelling or some sort of additional setback from a property line to minimize offsite impacts.
Am I correct in understanding that having a setback minimum might be more complicated because of what we just heard about, like, from an EFU property, you already have to have at least 100 feet. So if we say, oh, our minimum is 20 feet, then it kind of gets in the way of, if the minimum is 20 feet, but then.
Oh, there's a good code way to build that.
Okay. Okay.
The minimum setback shall be that assigned to a residence, but in no circumstances shall be less than X.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Thank you. Well, so we, as a planning commission, we don't actually have to worry about that. Like, we could go with, if people were interested in that, they could go with a setback recommendation, or they could go with more of a clustering recommendation, depending on what.
Or both.
Or both. Yeah. Okay, great.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I would have a couple questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
There was a concern brought up by fire services with regarding to revenues, et cetera. Population load versus emergency services. It's my understanding these would be considered real property and taxed as, or excuse me, personal property rather than real property. Do any of the personal property tax revenues go for emergency services, or how does that? As in fire, police, et cetera?
We had heard this concern, and I think you're tracking this correctly. There's, in our discussion with the assessor, it appears that some of the improvements, so if you make a pad and you make an RV pad, there may be some increased tax valuation of your home in association with that, but it's not, the RV isn't being counted for that. And we had heard concerns from our emergency responders that, that this could significantly increase rural populations without increasing the kind of the service fees that they receive per property or the tax valuation. So that's something that we have heard about, and also doesn't have a land use nexus as we've conceived of, at least of it to date. I think if you were concerned about that, and you can see in the record, there are comments to that effect, you might ask the, you could imagine, and I'm brainstorming here, but you could imagine that the board require, to your point, some sort of business license for the person running the property, and that they pay some sort of fee, and that fee is directed per unit to, emergency, some portion to emergency services. I mean, that's a significant program, when we haven't undertaken something quite like that before, but I imagine that's what you'd be looking at, is rather than kind of a land use directed fee, it would be more of a business license to make sure that those needed funds, effectively taxes, are allocated.
Okay. Yeah. Mostly if in the event we decide to close the record, I want to make sure we've got some of the information that we can debate later. But that was a question that I hadn't really considered too much, but when the topic was brought up is that the ADUs are real property that then add to the revenue base for local fire districts, et cetera. Whereas these are personal property and don't add to the tax base, but they add population without the corresponding revenue to help cover the services.
And just confirming with Tanya here with a thumbs up that we do have a comment from a fire district in the record on this topic.
Right. And that was what I was going off of. I just wanted clarification as whether you guys had thought through remedies and maybe possible solutions. So
we obtained clarification from the assessor about the what the tax implications could be, just as is. And as well said, that the improvements to the property to accommodate the RV, I believe the threshold is $18,500 this year, or maybe that's next tax year. I'm not quite sure. But if it surpasses that, then that could trigger an uptick in the property value, and that would, in turn trigger a rise to the property taxes. But if it's below that amount, if you're just making minor improvements that don't kind of hit that ceiling, then it wouldn't trigger that number that affects the property taxes. But beyond that, we, as well said, have not embarked on other methodologies for obtaining taxes yet. But the concerns from the fire professionals are in the record.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
Other questions? I can't see Commissioner Williams or Commissioner Trowbridge, so I can't tell if you guys have your hands up or not. So please do, if you're on Zoom, feel free to hop right in. And I can see you now, Commissioner Williams. I do have a question for you guys, which you may not be able to answer tonight, but we'll see if what will happen with the record. Oh, there's Commissioner Trowbridge. Okay. So my question is, are there examples of other communities who have implemented something like this, like a sort of before and after in rural county areas that we could, there's some heads nodding in the other side of the room. But I guess even if you have like names of communities I can Google and look up, I'm just kind of curious what's happened in other places that have instituted this.
I can say that in the state of Oregon, we're not aware because this legislation is not effective until January 1st. I think there's probably many communities outside of the state of Oregon who have done it, but I think to have a truly accurate representation, and because Oregon's land use laws are so particular and so unique, we don't have any other Oregon examples. As far as I know, we're kind of at the forefront of enacting this legislation in terms of counties, because Deschutes County likes to lead the way. But I think there's been experiences in cities perhaps, but of course they have a different land use pattern. And I'm of course open to hearing from other people who might know.
I'm like wondering about like Colorado and other,
Yeah,
you know, like
sure.
Montana, gateway communities that maybe are struggling with some of the same types of things we are, but and have similar landscapes. And anyway, yeah. Commissioner Altman. Oh, I was not going to, but do you have any? I mean, I guess I'll just get on Google and see if the record stays open.
Remember that it's important that you not take testimony outside of the record. So if you find something,
I will send it. I will submit it to the record. Yep.
And remember that we don't retrieve links, so you'll need to
print it and scan it. Thank you.
And that goes
paste it into a Word document and send it on over.
I'll see if I find anything first.
The record is kept open. You know, if there's people in this room who have examples, they can of course submit that in writing.
But please don't send us a link.
Correct.
If it's an article like from outside online or something cool like that, then you'll have to print it and scan it and then send it to us. Okay. Great. Commissioner Altman.
My question is about water, and I caught up on public testimony online today, but I neglected to look at agency testimony. Did OWRD have a chance to weigh in on this, and did they have any comments about possible, well, not possible, I mean, if this happens, obviously there's going to be an increase in water usage in rural properties. I'm just curious if any water agencies have spoken up about it and what their comments might be.
We generally send out a notice to kind of all involved agencies. We had not heard anything from them. We can certainly follow up with them. I know that with ADUs, they did respond, and the concerns are sort of similar. There is a kind of a threshold for domestic water use. And so essentially for ADUs, and those who know better can weigh in, it wasn't an actual significant effect to them, to the purposes of it didn't hit that ceiling. It doesn't matter if it's, you know, one hole in the yard or two holes in the yard, as long as it's underneath that domestic threshold, it was not triggering any sort of issue for them because it's under that cap that's considered normal usage for domestic use. Do I have that right?
Yeah, so just if I may, just as I recall for context, domestic well allows 15,000 gallons per day. For rural ADUs, you would need to stay within that threshold. You can't, OWRD will not allow a second well. So the expectation is that, just like with rural ADUs, that 15,000 gallon per day is met.
Okay. Other questions? Oh, I see Commissioner Williams has her hand up.
So we've dealt with this for a long time with like people who we were allowed to water a half acre lawn, but water well more than one. With the 15,800 gallon, I didn't write it down. Are we going to start tracking this for excessive use? So if we're adding another potential household to a property that has already been approved, an exempt well per se, will it start being tracked?
So it's important to note that residential dwellings on average use about 300 gallons per day for a dwelling. You know, presumably these RVs would use less, and that the cap for the exempt well uses is 15,000 gallons a day. So really, of course, the significant impact with water usage is, as you pointed to, as longs and irrigation. At this point, you know, Deschutes County doesn't regulate water. This is something that's done by OWRD, and to date, they haven't proposed a requirement for metering these wells for those uses. I recall that you've discussed in previous testimony that you're aware of exempt well properties that certainly have more than a half acre, which is also a limitation on the amount that can be watered under this. And but it's not something that we regulate.
All right. Other questions?
And we don't all want to turn in our neighbors.
It's true. Okay. Great. So we'll just go ahead and proceed to our options for the evening. We can close the hearing and commence deliberations. We can close the hearing and set a date for deliberations. We can close the oral record, but leave the written record open, or we can leave both the oral and written record open. Is there a motion on how we can proceed?
Commissioners,
Oh, go ahead.
Commissioner Williams?
I would move to close the public hearing, leave the written testimony open until December 28th at 4 p.m. and do a pre-deliberation discussion on, I think Peter said January 11th, at which point we would do a decision on the deliberation date.
Second.
All right. So it's been moved, and great motion, by the way, Commissioner Williams. I
Thank
just
you.
want to say gold star. Okay. So it's been properly moved and seconded to close the hearing, leaving the written record open until December 28th at 4 p.m. Have a pre-deliberation discussion on January 11th, 2024, and decide at that time on a deliberation date. So is there a debate on the motion? You're the maker of the motion, Commissioner Williams, so would you like to start?
I feel we have heard some great feedback from the public. I also feel we have heard some iterative feedback. And I don't know that having the public hearing open would bring as many people back, but we might get some more written feedback, and this might allow us for, you know, any questions we need to send through or any information we find. It was an addressed quickly, but I think we're finding that we're getting the juxt of people's points.
Okay. Are there other comments on the motion? Okay.
Is staff allowed to make a comment? I don't know if that's.
I'll allow it.
Just a quick note of the refinement that I know you all discussed having the pre-deliberation work session for the comp plan. It's possible that staff thinks that that might not be necessary for the January 11th for the purposes of these, because they are a lot simpler. They're complicated, but they're not as complicated as the comp plan. So it's possible that the January 11th meeting could actually just be regular deliberations, and we could there if the planning commission wishes. We could be prepared to do just a standard deliberation if you all choose.
Maybe something similar to the Tumalo community plan or transportation system plan in terms of how you organize those matrices.
Yeah, we would have a matrix or a
list
or a list depending on how it shakes out. But it's up to you. But we could be prepared to just go right to deliberations if possible.
Commissioner Williams?
Up to you.
I feel there were some comments today. If staff was able to fold all all these informations in, because I truly feel there are some additives and subtractives that could be amendments that might make it worth discussing.
So just having had the opportunity to talk a little bit with Tanya, Nicole, and Will about this on Monday, in terms of a pre-deliberation meeting, what that would entail is, well, I'll give the comp plan as an example, discussion of what we think are going to be things that we probably want to talk about at length during deliberation, but not actually deliberating. So that would be a time where you wouldn't say, well, I think that we should have setbacks into this, or I think we should definitely have, a cap on you would not be giving your opinion at that time. You would just be saying, hey, I'd like to see a matrix with all of the, with like in the case of a comp plan, I'd really like to see us spending a lot of time on housing and, or a lot of time on water or something like that. And here are my top things that I really want to discuss on those issues. And I think what I hear Tanya saying is that we may not need that step for the RV. Well, you're saying you guys don't feel that you need that step because you already know, you can already compile this information. Whereas with the comp plan, there's so much information. You want some feedback from us about what our top issues are that we want to be spending a lot of time debating.
Yeah, and it's of course completely up to the planning commission. If you want to delve deeper and say, okay, we want to talk about storage, we want to talk about acreage, we want to talk about this, we don't want to talk about that, that's completely within your purview. But just because this is a new kind of routine, we wanted to give you that flexibility of doing it either way.
Commissioner Williams?
So I feel if judicious notes were taken this evening with regard to specific acreage sites, with regard to setbacks and a couple of other notes, and I've got them all here. I've been writing dubiously. I would be okay to a friendly amendment.
Okay. So what would the friendly amendment entail?
The friendly amendment would entail that we start deliberations January 11th after having received written comment through December 28th at 4 p.m.
Okay, so it would read, close the hearing, leaving the written record open on through 4 p.m. on 12/28 and commence deliberations on January 11th, 24. Are you amenable to that, or do you have a different?
Actually not. Mostly because if we're going to be discussing the other, it may take our full meeting to discuss the comp plan stuff. And the reason we're having this discussion on the comp plan is because there's enough depth and the volume of information to go over that we probably need that. I guess I wouldn't have a problem in waiting to begin deliberations on this until a later date, or just not try to nail ourselves down on a deliberation date at this point. Just see kind of where the other one goes and get to this when we get to it.
And I concur. I don't want to feel like we need to push this through without more thought and consideration. I know the staff has done an amazing job compiling the information, but I also know it's a lot to consume while we are also discussing Comp Plan 2040. These are two, kind of monumentous things we're getting ready to handle.
Okay, so you want to stick with the original wording of your motion?
I would.
Okay, it's totally fine. Is there other debate on the motion, which currently reads, close the hearing, leaving the written record open until 4 p.m. on the 28th of December, have a pre-deliberation discussion on January 11th, 24, and decide then on when a deliberation date is.
Got it.
Vice Chair Hopiam?
That'll help clarify my support or lack of it for the motion, if I can ask the question of staff. So, Nunzi Gold said something to the effect that, in her view, this is kind of planning in reverse.
Don't
where-
forget to talk into the mic. I'm not sure if the Zoom.
Where, yeah, thank you. Where, there's so many variables that have yet to be, kind of not only not finalized, but really not even with options out there yet. And it seems a little bit fast tracked, and there's too many ill-defined provisions for the public to effectively offer specific testimony in regards to some of those provisions that are still outlined. So I just would wonder if staff has a response to that, if it's wise to go ahead, if it's even possible to go ahead with some kind of decision matrix or whatever it would look like to guide our deliberations, in light of the fact that we've closed the hearing and there wouldn't be further opportunity other than the written record for the public to comment. Just a little bit concerned about her comment and how that might be answered.
Yeah, and I can jump in there. I think that it's confusing that she's made that comment because before you and in the record and in the application is a full and complete proposed code. There's a draft code that has all the regulations, the definitions, all of those things. And that's what's happened in literally every legislative matter that's ever been before this body. And the purpose of a legislative matter is that you start out with what's called a post-acknowledgement plan amendment, and that is a proposal that's drafted by staff that says, hey, here's what we're thinking about doing. And then you go through a legislative process where you adjust it. So it's exactly the same process we went through for ADUs and for literally everything that's been in front of you. So there's a very specific proposal. Every rule's there. If you like it, you can comment on that. If you don't like it, you can comment on it. There's no vagueness or confusion about that. To the extent that the Planning Commission finds that set of regulations is unsuitable in some ways or insufficient, you certainly can add things to that. There are limits to that, though. There's certainly a notion, let's say that you wanted to say, you know what, we like the idea of RVs, but what we really want is condo towers. At that point, we'd have to go back to the drawing board. But so long as that we're staying fundamentally within the sideboards of the Senate Bill 1013 RVs, and that, the public has a reasonable opportunity to comment, that's what exactly is supposed to happen here. We're supposed to have a proposal, comments, modifications. The Planning Commission could go as far as to say we shouldn't do this at all, or we should limit this to fifth wheels. Those things that's the iterative process that we're in through here. There is in quasi-judicial land use matters. So if you're proposing something specific on a property for a permit, there's some specific rules about how you can engage in sequential actions. And so there's a requirement that you can't foreclose, if you were proposing, for example, a destination resort, and we're going to make some very significant changes along the way, you would need to have subsequent public opportunity to comment. And that's been an issue in those processes. But that's for land use applications and not these quasi-judicial processes. So we're well within our procedural sideboards here. And I've noticed our legal counsel, assistant legal counsel has stepped up. To the extent I don't have that exactly right or completely sideways, let me know.
Stephanie Marshall, Assistant Legal Counsel. I couldn't have said it better myself. Really. Yeah. And I think the distinction really is between the quasi-judicial process and the legislative process. You're sitting as a body that's making a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners, and it's a policy decision as to within the confines of the sideboards, if you will, of the Senate bill, is this something that we support? Is this something that the Planning Commission is going to recommend? And if so, what does that recommendation look like? And I think Tanya's done a really nice job of this is the package, and these are other things that are not included in the package, but we're opening this up for discussion because these are things that the legislature has hinted at or said, and by the way, you could do this, as long as we're meeting the requirements of the statute, the bare minimum. Like with ADUs, there's that 2-acre minimum. In this one, there is not an acreage minimum. And so that's kind of one of the things, the proposal is 1 acre. Does that mean that the Planning Commission has to say, okay, well, that's all we're deciding here is 1 acre and we're stuck with that? No. And ultimately, you're making a recommendation to the policymakers, the Board of County Commissioners, who will be considering legislation and may consider ultimately, no, we don't want this in the county. So I hope that my comments are helpful in addition to everything else you've heard this evening. But definitely I'm here to answer any other questions.
Madam Chair.
Can I a response?
Peter Gutowski.
Just to supplement, to add a third perspective to the question. Sorry if that's grading, but anyway, if that's possible, I'm asking for
Go ahead, Peter Gutowski. Sorry, I'm just trying to be respectful by using everyone's last names tonight. Tanya Saltzman.
Yeah, and
I'm not. That wasn't intended to sound weird.
No,
That was
I was looking.
Stephanie Marshall, Will Groves, Peter Gutowski.
I was just looking for.
Yeah, I was just
recognition.
Yes, please. Yes.
Thank you.
I'm just not saying Peter because it sounds too casual.
I think we were, as the moment that Ms. Gould was offering that testimony, Will and Stephanie and I were beginning to contemplate it as Vice Chair Hofkamp identified. Some other follow-up remarks. So the Planning Commission gets, when you close the hearing and you're ready to deliberate, you make a recommendation. The Board of County Commissioners will hold a second hearing, a de novo hearing, right? So there's a second bite at the apple to get into some of the details, depending on a host of topics that have been raised. And I would also say, and this isn't providing any type of value judgment to it, but there have been legislative amendments in the past. I think Chair Karras, maybe Commissioner Altman, you were there for the floodplain amendments that we had several years ago. Anyway, it was a very complex set of amendments pertaining to the floodplain. And recommendations went to the board. The board considered testimony. And at one point, there were 3 different tiers. One of those tiers, I recall, the Board of County Commissioners directed it back to the Planning Commission to reopen the hearing. So that is always an option if the public finds themselves, even in the board hearing, that there are all of these additional elements that the Planning Commission addressed and offered majority and minority opinions on, and the board held an independent hearing, and the public was still adamant about, can we have more time? The Planning Commission didn't talk about that example, the condo towers, as an analogy. It has to stay within the confines of the amendment. The board has that ability to refer it back, and we would do a separate notice and start the hearing again. So we're very cognizant of procedure and procedural due process. And I appreciate the Vice Chair raising this. And I think the answers that you've received from all of us should give you the assurance, and to the public at large, that there's going to be an opportunity to provide, presumably, written testimony until the end of the month, track eventual deliberations, and participate, we encourage you to do so, with the Board of County Commissioners. And the process can remain quite fluid to ensure that the public process is honored.
Commissioner Altman, you had a question?
My question's for Tanya Saltzman. Would it be possible, we've heard testimony from a number of people who were interested in having the proposal expanded to include smaller lots. Would it be possible to get a list of how many properties that would increase the proposal by, how many property if you said a half an acre and above, and also a map of what that would look like?
Yeah, I will say that probably a map won't be super helpful because it'll be so kind of scaled out and smudgy, but yes, we can look at half an acre, maybe 3/4 as well, if that's, yeah, absolutely.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Cyrus?
I would mention that we are actually debating on whether or not to close debate.
Yes.
But
That's a relevant question, though.
But it's actually technically out of order, but
so
with regard to
I think we're trying to debate the motion about whether to close the hearing and leave the written record open through December 28th.
Right.
And then we're
I had discussion on.
Right. But I think Commissioner Altman's, so we had a question from Vice Chair Hofkamp, which had many answers to it, and all very useful and probably good to discuss. And then we had, but that was related to him trying to figure out how he wants to vote on the motion. And then I think also your question is also related to how you want to vote on the motion, because if there's more information that can be added, then that's a good reason to leave the written record open. So
I was actually still in the middle of my comment, but
I'm so sorry. Please continue your comment.
what I wanted to add is that I was also a little taken aback by the comment with regard to the process and the fact that, as was mentioned, we take a proposal, we listen to the public hearing, the public comments, we make recommendations based on those, we refer them to the Board of Commissioners, who then holds a new public hearing. So in fact, I was actually pretty surprised by comments from somebody who has been involved in this process for so many years. And with that, I think we've beat this horse to death, and I think we should vote on it.
Okay. Any other comments before we proceed to a vote?
I have
Commissioner Kelly?
Yeah, since I'm still trying to figure, one thing I just want us to be, that I find myself through these processes as seen, is if I wait too long to debate, I forget things. And I even though I reread the notes and I reread public hearing, I'd hate for us to push it out too far, because then I don't feel like I'm as prepared. So
Great.
Just to comment,
that is actually a really important point. I have a couple thoughts myself. I will try to keep them brief. One, the comp plan pre-deliberation discussion will not likely take very long, because this is an opportunity for us to respond to staff's requests for feedback of what we would like to see in our matrix. So this is not an opportunity to discuss the comp plan update really at all. It's just an opportunity to kind of go down the row and say, here are my big issues I want to see us deliberate, so that staff can make our packet for the actual deliberations. The second reason, or the second comment I want to make, is that if this motion does pass, I would really like to see staff send us in our packet the matrix for us to deliberate on the RV amendment, because it's very possible that we might get through the entire agenda of the pre-deliberation meeting in 20 minutes. And then we, according to the motion, if it passes, would be able to decide on a deliberation date at that time. And we could pick that very night. We could say, gosh, guys, we have a lot of time. Let's go ahead and deliberate on the RV amendments. But in order, I'm ready to vote yes on this, but I'd like us to be ready to deliberate on it that very night if time allows, or if time doesn't allow, then we have the option of setting deliberations for a later date without having to go through the whole rescinding process. And then finally, there will be a new chair on that meeting, elected at the beginning of the meeting. I love being chair, but they only let you do it for two years. So we'll be passing that torch, and that chair may or may not want to get involved with deliberations and motion making and all that on their very first time, since they don't even know that they're going to be chair yet. So they won't, so all of these are reasons to maybe be flexible. And I see that we've got staff gearing up to make a comment about my comments. So
I could jump in there. So I wanted to talk a little bit about pre-deliberations generally. We've offered and recommended those in the case of the comprehensive plan and some of our other projects, because of the broad scope of the comments that we've received. In this amendment, I think that there's a limited number of issues that have come up about screening and separation and acreage sizes, and there's a limited number of other concerns. So I think we could probably build you a pretty good matrix to start a discussion, and to the extent there are additional items, you could handle that in ways that we've handled prior discussions. Really, the pre-deliberation is when there's a kind of an overwhelming amount of material that you might engage in. We're not sure what's going to be important to you. As staff, we're always concerned about railroading you into thinking what we think is important is what you think is important. And especially for vast records, that risk becomes ever greater. In this case, if you were comfortable, we could certainly bring you right to deliberations, or we could have something like a deliberation work session, and you could then proceed to deliberations. But at least as we conceived it, the point of pre-deliberations was for you to give us some direction to help us build a matrix. So it would be hard to go from we wouldn't be able to go from pre-deliberations as we had conceived it to deliberations, because we'd have to subsequently then build the matrix in response to that. So if you would like to keep that open, we could have something, more like a work session that's scheduled, and we could bring a matrix to that work session. And one of the things you could do is take a look at it and say, hey, we looked at your, the matrix is in the packet. We've asked you some questions in a work session, non-deliberative format. We feel comfortable. We do not feel comfortable with the matrix. We want to proceed tonight. We do not want to proceed to deliberations tonight.
That sounds ideal from my perspective. So if you guys can do that, then I'll probably vote yes on the motion.
Madam Chair, and that's precisely why I like the flexibility of this motion is if things progress the next meeting, we could move right into that. If not, we can put it off.
Perfect. Love it. Okay. Commissioner Kelly, how do you vote? Sorry, any other comments before we vote? Okay. Commissioner Kelly, how do you vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Altman?
Aye.
Vice Chair Hofkamp?
Aye.
Commissioner Trowbridge?
Aye.
Commissioner Williams, we can't see you.
Aye.
Commissioner Cyrus?
Aye.
And I'll also vote yes, so it's unanimous. To close the hearing, leaving the written record open. That means you can still send in comments through 4 p.m. on December 28th. Have a pre-deliberation discussion on January 11th, 2024. At which point we'll decide when to commence deliberations. Could be that night, could be at a later date. And our staff are going to bring us a matrix to say we like, or gosh, can you add these 75 things so that we can deliberate at a later time. Okay, great. Thank you, members of the public, for being here. You're welcome to stick around for our last item, but if you decide to take off, thanks for being here. And our next item is Planning Commission and staff comments. Should we start with Peter Gutowski? Good old Peter.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I get teased weekly especially when I go to management meeting and I have lots of stickies. So I'm happy to go first, or I'm happy to go last. Would you like me to go first with all my stickies?
Go ahead and go first.
Well, thank you. I apologize. I missed dinner today. I have been dealing with some kind of stomach crud, and I just thought I could be here away from you, but still be here. I wanted to impart just experience tonight's 2 hearings, but more just kind of honor the year that we've just had together. And I want to thank all of you for an incredibly productive year. And many of my stickies are just, I wanted to give you a recap of what this planning commission has accomplished. And I think I can speak for everyone in our department, including legal counsel, that I don't think you'll find a planning commission that is engaged in more prominent topics in the state of Oregon. If not, I don't know. I'd take this planning commission and the work that you are doing and tout it anywhere in this country. So I just wanted to go through the list of topics. You had amateur radio facility amendments. You had hearings on housekeeping amendments, a destination resort text amendment, Deschutes 2040 comprehensive plan, the Mule Deer inventory update. You provided direction to the Board of County Commissioners on the fiscal year which is this fiscal year, what I call the 24 community development work plan. We saw the departure of 2 planning commissioners, Commissioners Swisher and Kirby, and we brought in 2 new commissioners, Commissioner Kelly and Commissioner Trowbridge. We had with the assistance of Stephanie Marshall, we did a planning commission training. You provided feedback on a conventional housing combining subzone, the transportation system plan update, the rural accessory dwelling unit text amendments, the Tumalo community plan. We were able to do a planning commission retreat with to see the Bend Airport, the Core 3 site, the Stevens Road track, and in addition to have the retreat at the Bend Airport, you had held a joint meeting with the Board of County Commissioners. And then, of course, tonight, you took testimony again on RVs as rental dwellings. So that's significant. And many of these items required more than one public hearing. Transitioning, I wanted to let you know that the Board of County Commissioners, Stephanie and I participated in this. This is not a land use decision, but we did collaborate with administration on December 6th. The Board of County Commissioners adopted orders that allow for safe parking within the Bend and Redmond urban growth boundaries on land that's not in the city limits. So under state law, and the orders reflect it for both these two areas in Bend and Redmond, you can utilize different sheltering opportunities besides being in vehicles. You could be in tents, you could be in a yurt. There's certain conditions that you have to have basic facilities, sanitation, the ability to handle garbage, the ability of safe hygiene. We don't have any formal proposals yet, but the board wanted to make that available to the extent that a private property owner wanted to make their property available for just such an opportunity. The other order was for only safe parking of RVs within 1 mile of Redmond and Bend's urban growth boundary. That's limited to zones that are not farm and forest. So rural residential exception areas, rural, so I think there's some pockets of rural industrial areas. That would also require eligible property owner to demonstrate that there's sanitation available, that there's hygiene opportunity for washing hands and a place for garbage. There has been no formal proposal for that opportunity, but the Board of County Commissioners, this is addressing our houselessness challenge, wanted to make that available to the extent that any eligible property owner in those zoning designations wanted to explore it. I have two more updates. I wanted to let you know that staff and I will be providing updates to the board next year. The Oregon Department of Land Conservation and Development and the Oregon Water Resources Department is undertaking rulemaking. And so this rulemaking could have implications, likely will have implications in Deschutes County. As it pertains to the Oregon Water Resources Department, I'm not imagining that all of a sudden we're going to be having regulatory authority, but it's something that I think we should track. You may want to participate individually. I will be providing updates. The Association of Oregon County Planning Directors is getting updates on all of the rule-making efforts that I'm about to summarize, so we will keep you informed. But as it pertains to the Oregon Water Resources Department, they are going to be doing rulemaking on groundwater allocation. And this has been a prominent topic. It's been reported in the paper. And in January, I want to say that I don't have the date in front of me, but I think the rulemaking is going to commence in late January on this topic in terms of how the Water Resources Department is going to protect senior water right holders from new demands for water. I think predominantly groundwater permits to ensure they're protected, and at the same time, there's a understanding about how to manage those resources sustainably going forward. There's been a lot of publicity in, for example, Harney County, where they've seen groundwater declines due to new groundwater uses. So wanted to let you know that we'll keep you informed of that rulemaking. The ones that pertain to Deschutes County from a land use standpoint, and I'm not sure if this has been reported in the bulletin or on other news outlets, but DLCD is going to revisit its Goal 5 program as it pertains to cultural resources, specifically archaeological resources. There's an acknowledgement that these sensitive cultural resources that I think many tribal governments prioritize was not adequately addressed in the Goal 5 rulemaking that occurred several decades ago. There's an understanding that this needs to be addressed and better coordination needs to occur. If I had to project, I think there'll probably be some coordination responsibilities for certain quasi-judicial applications to ensure that tribal governments, the state, Historic Preservation Office has an opportunity to alert property owners or developers that there is a sensitive resource. Archaeological and cultural resources are typically not disclosed because of concerns for vandalism or vandals. So that's a process that's going to get kicked off. There's another one. This is a multi-year effort. We'll know more about this starting in January. Actually, the Department of Land Conservation and Development is going to get the Land Conservation Development Commission is going to get debriefed on this next week. It's a farm and forest improvements project. The state, as I understand it today, is interested in codifying in law some of the case law that has originated, some of the case law that has been generated over the last several years pertaining to uses in farm and forest zone land. So there's been different interpretations, for example, about commercial activities in conjunction with farm use. There's been different outcomes on significant projects about how the farm impacts anytime if you're doing a project that's not a sub one use in the farm, or really it comes up with exclusive farm use, one has to demonstrate that use is not detrimentally impacting adjoining farms. So that's called a farm impacts test. It comes right out of statute. I think counties have been interpreting that responsibility in different ways. So those are two examples. There's several other circumstances that I think the state wants to update administrative rules to ensure that there's consistent applications of these type of sub-2 uses that are being contemplated in these resource zone lands. It's a multi-year project. They've also spoken to looking at regional variations. So I'm not sure what that means, but we of course are monitoring that and we'll be tracking it. The Association of County Planning Directors, like I said earlier, this is another item that we're going to get updated on because it has impacts, of course, to all 36 counties. The last one, which I guess kind of ties into the topic that what I just mentioned, solar power generation facilities rulemaking is occurring. As I understand it, it's exclusive to Eastern Oregon counties, so counties east of the divide. I think the objective is to establish rulemaking that encourages, so I use that word deliberately, that encourages counties to identify, I presume through a public process, lands that are that are suitable for solar photovoltaic opportunities after taking in consideration Goal 5 resources, wildlife, cultural resources, commercial agricultural priorities. But the intention is, as the state is trying to commit to a commitment to renewable energy, they want to encourage counties to identify those areas that are most suited for renewables after taking consideration these other factors and other priorities and values that contribute to to farm and predominantly farmland. So it's not a mandate, it's not a requirement as I understand it, but that rulemaking is coming out of some legislation that was passed, and I didn't write it down in 2023. The last thing that I was going to mention, and the chair reminded everybody, so it's just that your first meeting of the new year on January 11th, you will be electing a chair and vice chair. And it's been a pleasure. We appreciate the leadership that Chair Kiris has provided the last 2 years, and look forward to that process and continuing to bring forward the types of projects that you and the board identify that the community needs to be contemplating as we evolve and change as a community. But as I wrap up, I really want to thank you sincerely for all of your hard work and your commitment. No one's here now, but maybe there's someone listening online, to the public, for public involvement, for public input. It's been, I'll probably say this every year because I'm a broken record, but I just think the work that you do is so important, and we appreciate it on a bi-weekly basis. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. What? Gotcha. But sincere thanks to you, and also to all of the staff, but I'm sure we'll be getting into that in our planning commission comments as well. Will, do you have anything?
Yes, William W. Groves, Science and Management, Bachelor of Science Anthropology, your planning manager, here to give you a short update. Yesterday, I was before the Board of County Commissioners with our work plan update. So of course, annually we set off on a work plan and then visit the board periodically to talk to them about how that's going and to get input on what direction they'd like us to go in with resources. And of course, we're coming to a time where many large projects are wrapping up. The 2040 comprehensive plan, the transportation system plan, the Tumalo community plan, some enormous projects that we've been working on for a long time. And so looking for guidance for the board in the new year, and they gave us some guidance, and consistent with our expectations, they've asked us to allocate the majority of our resources to clear and objective updates. That's going to be a huge undertaking to get the code up into clear and objective standards. The major choice before them was our next community plan update. So we just completed through the Planning Commission and now working through the board, the Tumalo community plan, and both the Terrebonne and the Newberry Country plan. So our South County plan were both up for renewal or revisiting. And the board chose the Newberry Country plan for first, updating, with both of them having significant reasons to visit them. But the Newberry Country plan, the city of La Pines engaged in their comprehensive planning process. The Newberry Regional Partnership is doing some visioning work in that area, as well as some of our South County communities having some interest in us coming back that direction. So per the board's direction, that'll be coming your way next, with lots of public outreach and engagement to South County after about roughly 10 years since we've been down there. Following, of course, Terrebonne, what's interesting is that community plan says at such time as a sanitary district arrives in the community, they want to have another discussion with us. And it's both been 10 years and that's coming. So both of them relatively urgent. We also have a list of kind of a longer list of projects through the work plan, that include a variety of projects that we do sort of catch as catch can. And they didn't have really a strong preference on which ones that we worked with. Although we did acknowledge that Dark Skies continues to be something that's we're tracking on. We've gotten through a public stakeholder engagement with that, and we'll be coming back to the board to see where they'd like us to go following that. Certainly the discussions that we've had about both education and regulatory opportunities will be before the board at that point. Thank you.
Okay, great. Other staff comments?
I won't say much. I'll just say Stephanie Marshall, Assistant Legal Counsel. Thanks. Yeah. No, a middle initial, Stephanie E. Marshall. Let's see, graduated with a BA from the University of Washington, go Dogs, and Willamette Law School, class of 94, law review. Anyway, yeah, I wasn't sure if Tanya was going to save her voice because I feel bad that you've been fighting it. All I have to say is thank you. I really enjoy working here with staff and with you all. So yeah, it's been a fun year. I'm looking forward to 2024. So that's really all. Now, you.
Oh, gosh.
Since I pulled the button.
Yeah, Tanya M. Saltzman, BA Sociology, Master of Science, Urban Planning. No, thank you. Thank you. Thanks for bearing with me in all of my ups and downs and for asking the good questions. Genuinely appreciate you all keeping us on our toes and pointing things out that we get, so involved in stuff. So it's just a pleasure. So thanks.
Okay. Commissioner Cyrus?
Yeah, Matthew K. Cyrus.
Good to know.
BS in agricultural resource economics and business management. But anyhow, I would like to thank all of you for all the hard work this year. We have gotten a lot accomplished, and I appreciate you guys. Everything you've been able to present to us in a good, orderly manner. It makes our job easier. I appreciate you getting some longer mics. I don't see anybody having to hold them up or lean over quite so bad. And we have accomplished a lot this year. But one thing I would like to bring before the commission, and I attended the transportation planning meeting before the Board of Commissioners, and I was a little disturbed by comments made by ODOT in that they were blasting the commission for not allowing them to participate in the process. And I mentioned to the Board of Commissioners that ODOT had certainly had an opportunity to participate in the public hearing and submit written comments, and had chosen not to. It was, I thought, completely uncalled for them to be blaming the Planning Commission for their inability to submit comments. And I just wanted to bring it to the attention of the rest of the Planning Commission, and that there's certainly a mischaracterization.
Do you guys have any idea why they felt that way? Have you received any feedback, or was there testimony for the board, like the first you had heard, that they were unsatisfied with the process?
I think that, and because your record's closed, I can speak to items outside the record. I think that they were, underprepared for the level of engagement that was going to happen, and had not put all their materials in the record. And then were frustrated that the Planning Commission had come to a conclusion that was not made based on materials that weren't in the record, that you possibly couldn't have made a conclusion because you didn't have those materials.
Okay.
So
do you think they just misunderstood?
I think that they didn't understand kind of the depth and engagement that both the Planning Commission and the public were going to want from that, and hadn't submitted the materials before the Planning Commission that they needed to support the points that they wanted to make. They have submitted additional materials before the board. So,
okay, so
it's an advantage of a two-step process, but it would have been helpful if they had put more in the record, certainly as you came into that, and you made, I think you made a reasoned decision based on the material before you, which is what is asked of you.
I mean, I can elaborate just a little bit more since I was there.
Yeah, thank you.
Specifically, when we were in deliberations, there was an attempt made by transportation staff to discuss the fact that ODOT had debated east side versus west side. And we asked whether it was in the record. And the conclusion was it was not in the record. And so they were upset that they weren't allowed to add to a closed record.
Okay.
But the bottom line is that they had an opportunity up until that point, prior to us closing the record, if they felt it was relevant. Obviously, they didn't appear to believe any of that information was relevant to our decision making. And when we made the decisions we did, they were upset because they hadn't had the foresight to submit information to the record that they thought was appropriate. Which, instead of just saying, hey, we didn't think about this, we're here before the Board of Commissioners to discuss this, they chose to lay the blame on the planning commission for excluding them from the process.
Yeah, I don't know that it's appropriate to do this or anything, but it just seems like if it would be good for them to understand the process so that they can participate to the level that they would like to next time. And rather than walking away with the conclusion that there's something exclusionary about this group, it's more like, hey, like if I could say directly to them, I would probably just say like, hey, I think my understanding is that the record was closed and that's why we can allow the additional information. Do you have any questions going forward about like how you can make sure you get stuff in there on time? Not to like enter some sort of dialogue, but just, I mean, I don't know, if I were them, I would want to know, how can I prevent this from happening next time?
Yeah, and we've certainly had staff, we've communicated with them, a little more detail, and not to belabor it, is I think that they didn't anticipate the planning commission providing a specific recommendation on the side of the highway, and that they had engaged in some significant processes and public outreach and testimony in that process, and that they didn't realize you were going to get into that level of detail and then didn't support it. It's that's just a thing that happens, and the materials before the board, who's the body, will make this decision. So in some ways, it's frustrating, and it's frustrating that the characterization, I can, understand the frustration associated with the characterization of the process, but that's what the PC does, is that you find out, what people are interested in, what's got talked about, and to the extent that, you as reasonable people come to a conclusion that, potentially needed more information to support, that's what, we bring to the subsequent process. So, a little bit turbulent, but certainly ended up in the right place.
That's a good, kind of makes you a good summary, makes you feel a little better. So thanks. Anything else, Commissioner Stives?
No, I'm good.
Okay, Vice Chair Hovekamp.
Couple things. Thanks for this past year, colleagues. It's and for that recap, Peter, interesting to look back over all that's been accomplished. Nice work, colleagues. It's been an honor working with you. Thank you, Chair Karras, for again running a couple of great hearings tonight. It's a lot to keep track of. I appreciate that. It went smoothly. I remain, I guess, a little bit. I've shared this concern before, but I don't know if it's a concern. I just wonder if our strict adherence, to the extent that it is strict, to parliamentary procedure, to Robert's rules, is always optimal. For instance, I'll just be concrete. I guess when we finish a hearing and we have laid out, and that's very handy, by the way, staff, to have the options there. It's just a reminder of what we can continue, when we can schedule the record being closed or schedule deliberations and all that kind of thing. But in my view, moving immediately to a motion and then thinking about its implications and then considering amending it, friendly or not, backing back out of it or considering that, in my view, is less efficient than taking a few moments, thinking about our options, maybe drafting a motion. What if we did this? What if we did that? And then going forward with a motion. I don't know. I wonder if that might not be more efficient, even if not strictly parliamentary. Anyway, just something that's still on my mind. But I wanted to also add my thanks to the excellent planning staff, community development, and planning staff. It's a pleasure working with you, learning from you. These are big projects that, Nicole, you've been working on the comp plan for months and months and months, years. Tanya, always professional with the hearing tonight and your presentations. Thank you for being here, Stephanie. Peter, again, nice summation. Honor working with you. Will, your answer to my question tonight was just extraordinary and very, very, very helpful. I know sometimes when I get questions from my students, difficult questions from my students, I answer with, I don't know. And I've not gotten that from you guys yet. I would like to invite you to someday say, I don't know, because it's perfectly legit. anyway, thank you for all your work this year, and for allowing me to learn from you. And that's all I have.
Okay, I'll make a couple comments. Wrapping up his chair here. I really enjoyed the opportunity. I feel like I've learned a lot. I especially appreciate the staff support. Oh my gosh, like if I did not have you guys, I had no idea what I would have done the last 2 years. I was very intimidated to try to step up. This is a significant challenge for me, and it was such a good experience just because of the level of support that I had. So I know I'll probably look back on this as one of those moments in my life where I tried something hard and it worked out well, and I just really don't think it would have been that way without you guys. Also to my colleagues, I really, really deeply appreciate the respect that you've given me over the last couple years, and kind of let me figure out, some of these tricky questions about, who to have go first, and to what extent I want to adhere to the parliamentary procedure and things like that. A couple notes about that decision and how I've looked at that. I want to say these things partly in response to what you said, but mostly just because I think you guys want to, as you go forward, I'm only here for another couple years. And I think that it's good to think about, as you maybe for the couple newer commissioners we have, this commission it's a fragile thing. Civil discourse is a very fragile thing right now. I've often felt like this is the one place that I can come and be honest about what I view on things and still be respected by people who maybe think differently from me. And if you don't work hard to preserve that, it goes away. Even if you have great people, and we have really great people in this group, but you have to have a structure that is there, that you're adhering to, that keeps everything orderly. Otherwise it turns into Facebook. So you don't want that. And then the other, so for people that are unfamiliar with Robert's Rules and Parliamentary Procedure, the idea, and Matt's more familiar with it than I am, of course, but the idea that I understand behind this is that the goal is to give everybody a chance to speak in a fair way that is very predictable. So it shouldn't be like, well, whoever the chair is feeling cozy with because you got a good dinner conversation gets to go first. It's the maker of the motion who goes first. And there's a ton of little rules like that. But the purpose of the rules is not to become burdensome to people who want to get things done, but it's to keep things fair and orderly. So we have stretched them a little bit in response to feedback in the last year or so, where we're having these pre-deliberation discussions that have seemed to have gone really well and still fit within the context of that, the spirit of it, of being fair and not having people sort of jump ahead and start to put their opinions in here and there. Like, it's like, okay, now it is now time to make a motion. Now we all know what we're debating. I feel like that's gone well, but there's an extent to which you can stretch that before things fall apart. So that's something to think about. And then finally, less important to me, but very important to Dale Crawford, who stated this last time we had this discussion, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. If it says in the handbook that we're following Robert's rules, then we need to do what we say we're going to do. And that may have been exactly word for word what he said, only with a much more Dale forceful conviction than I can really muster. So if people want to deviate from that in the future, as I sort of transition out of chair and also transition off the planning commission, I think that'd be fine, but I think you all should consider amending the handbook and amending what we tell the public we're doing if we're not going to do that. So those are kind of my thoughts about not just Robert's Rules, but about trying to pass the torch to someone who wants to carry forward that civil discourse and try to hold that together, because then the next person's going to follow what you did and the next person's going to follow what they did. So I got it from Dale got it from Steve got it from someone else. So I mean, it's just been passed down. So Commissioner Altman, still stuck in my head from a year ago.
Thank you as always to staff. I don't know how you maintain your good cheer into all hours of the night. I really don't, but I really appreciate it. And you do it very well. When I was reading through the public comment, the last public comment today, online. I think it was the last one. It was from a young person. Like, I don't know if he was in high school or she, I can't remember. 11th grade.
Cash.
And I wondered if there's ever been, or if there could be a program where, you know, a student for a semester comes and sits in on our meetings or something like that. I thought it was really great that they, you know, submitted testimony and wanted to get involved. And I think it would be great to do that if possible. Tell me what you think.
Could I make a quick comment? Is that okay? Yeah, I wanted to just provide some context. So we actually, Cash Hattenhauer, who's the public commenter, he actually reached out to our office, hoping to speak to a planner because he was just interested in planning. So he wanted to talk a little bit about growth, development, etc. So I actually was able to meet with him. His mom was also there, and it was a great opportunity to talk about the comprehensive plan. He obviously had never been aware of a planning process, and he essentially was asking the question, what is the county doing to think ahead? And so I think with all of your great work, I was able to give him a document and say, this is what we're thinking about doing. What do you think? So he brought that to his classroom. He was conducting a research project. So you saw in his letter, he surveyed some other students. I reached back out to him. He had a suggestion to have county planners come to the classroom. So I did ask him, hey, would you be willing to connect us with your teacher? We'd love to come present in the future and make that connection. We've sought in other planning processes to try to go into high schools and middle schools and elementary schools. And sometimes it's just difficult due to the timing and all the requirements that teachers have to cover all these, you know, requirements for education. So we do try to seek out these opportunities where we can. But I do like your idea of, you know, of kind of having a exploratory process to, you know, involve youth as part of the commission or other programs. But just wanted to let you know that we as planners, and especially those of us who are AICP, we do have an obligation to meet with, you know, younger generations and inform them about planning. So I'm excited that you saw that comment, and we'll keep that communication line open. Thanks.
Commissioner Kelly?
Yeah, you know, it's funny, as a little foreshadowing, I guess, to my time here was I was a public relations officer at Redmond High School. Go Panthers. And you had to meet, I think it was once a month, with the superintendent and discuss. And so it'd be interesting if there was some kind of, like, even through the leadership program, if there was some kind of, you know, position there that, you know, a kid could have an interest in planning, and then it's I don't know. But thank you everyone for welcoming me this year into the Planning Commission. I honestly didn't know exactly what I was getting into. When I signed up, I was just really excited to learn about the process of the planning department and our county, because it's been in my, land has been in my life, my whole life and career. And so I wanted to understand the backstory to some of this, and boy, am I getting it. And I'm just super, and it's exciting me. And I think about it all the time now. And so I kind of understand, your guys' passion a little better. And I am just so impressed by all the support I've gotten from, like Jessica said, from staff, making me feel prepared as best they can for this position. And I appreciate all of you guys and our Zoom planning commissioners too, just for making me feel welcome. So thank you all. Thank you, Peter, for your leadership. And I'm excited for next year.
Commissioner Trowbridge, are you still there? I can't see your picture, but, and Commissioner Williams, you're shaking your head. Can you see on the participants that he's not here? Okay. Commissioner Williams, let's hear from you then, and then we'll wrap it up.
So somewhere we lost the middle initial. So some of you folks might not be old enough to know Tony Michelle Mabel Williams. That's my middle. And Peter, thank you for such an awesome breakdown on everything we've done, because we do it, we continue to do it. We have so many commissioners as we go through the years that transition from starting to ending and folks coming out in the middle. And it's a challenge, and we do this on a volunteer basis. And we need to do it, and we need to listen to our constituents, and we need to take it seriously. And I appreciate all my commissioners, Chair Karis, you have done a fantastic job in your position. I look forward to continuing with you through the end of your position. And just really glad that we have the opportunity to listen to the people that we represent. And to me, that is the most important thing. Is I may or may not agree with someone, but if I don't listen to them, I will never understand how they got to their position and their idea and their thought. And you can learn so much when you listen to different points of view, and you can learn. And I think that's the most important part of what we do as Planning Commission, as volunteers, as a citizen advisory committee, is to listen to the people and to represent the people. So Peter, Will, Tanya, Nicole, I'd say Tarek, but you're not here. But thank everyone so much for everything you do. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and I will say go Huskies. They're not my team. But I will say that I am rooting for them 100%.
Okay, great. Well, thanks, everyone. So Nicole, you moved up here. Did you have a comment? Okay, you're just hanging out. Okay, great. Just wanted to make sure I didn't leave you out.
I know my middle name.
I mean,
It's Turner. My great grandmother's last name. Her first name's Muriel. I'm glad that they chose Turner.
that's really sweet. Okay, so it is now 8:26. I will go ahead and adjourn the meeting.